Wealth, fame, and power are some of the first words in One Piece, but they're also a big clue into solving Luffy's dream. Today, we're uncovering exactly what Luffy's dream is, what that means to the world, and why it matters to Oda's message. Pretty much every One Piece fan knows dreams play a big role in the story. Why is it that we still don't know the main character's dream? With terms like reverie, which is a type of dream, characters such as Luffy and Garp literally falling asleep as a character trait, and Vegapunk linking dreams to devil fruits, you'd think we'd have a bit more of a solid idea as to how dreams actually affect the world explicitly. Well, by putting these hints in order, we can follow a pattern that tells us exactly what Luffy's dream will be. By looking at the individual reactions of the Straw Hat crew to Luffy revealing his dream, as well as putting all the other dreams we've seen in One Piece together, such as Otohimo's, we can uncover what Luffy's dream is. Of course it's Luffy, so it's not your average dream, but instead something mysterious and practically world-changing, while at the same time being ridiculous. He's had it since a child, so it has to be something a kid can think of, and Oda does a lot to depict how children's dreams affect the One Piece world. Okay, so where do we begin? Well, it starts with Luffy being a fool. Not too long ago I saw a Reddit post which I've linked below saying Luffy's name backwards phonetically is a fool, so Luff being fool backwards, then bending the E in Luffy to sound like an A, so you get a fool. While this might sound like I'm stretching your gomu, it sparked the motivation to actually write up something I've been following for a little while. Over the years, Oda has used a certain word quite a few times, and it's something that ties the reader to Joy Boy. This word is fool. There's actually tons of quotes in One Piece about being a fool, and when we put them together in a certain order, we get a spicy message about why Joy Boy figures are so powerful. It's not all smiles though, as Oda takes it to dark places in a few scenes, such as when Squad stabs Whitebeard and Whitebeard replies, "I love you son, even if you are a fool." So without further ado, make sure you're subbed and let's start chopping away at Luffy's foolish dream. The Fool is a major archetype in the tarot, often represented as the first card in the major arcana. It symbolizes new beginnings, innocence, spontaneity, and the journey into the unknown. The Fool is on a path of discovery, often depicted as a traveler stepping off a cliff, carrying a small bag which represents his experiences, and sometimes accompanied by a dog or a loyal companion. This archetype can be interpreted in different ways: a naive dreamer embarking on an adventure, a trickster or a wild card whose actions defy logic, or a wise fool who embraces the unknown and grows through his experiences. Luffy embodies the Fool in a perfect way. He rushes headfirst into adventure, seemingly ignorant of danger, but his boundless optimism and faith in his friends always carry him forward. He is often underestimated because of his carefree attitude, but his actions consistently lead him towards greater wisdom and power. While Luffy does represent the Fool Oda refers to in all these quotes, Buggy is probably the most direct manifestation of the idea. Buggy is a fool in the classic sense. He's a clown that bumbles his way through situations, falling upwards, until he somehow ends up gaining power. Oda highlights this with Buggy actually calling other characters fool on many occasions. He rises to Yonko despite his incompetence, but that said, Buggy does have a dream to find a certain treasure, expressed when he trades it with Luffy and explicitly states his dream has come true. As such, following Oda's Fool pattern clues us into how Buggy's journey ends. Now, we know that the whole theme of being a fool is important because it's reoccurring, so let's go through some of these quotes and unpack what it means to be a fool in One Piece. Once in a long while, a fool comes along who, having set his sights on something, won't quit fighting until he dies. Whether he wins or loses this fight, I admire a man like that. There's no give in him. This is a One Piece quote that comes from a Shakespearean play called King Lear. The fool of the play, Lear, says these words to express his admiration for the man who persists in his goals regardless of the outcome. This tells us that Oda is indeed leaning into the traditional idea of what it means to be a fool, while illustrating a specific detail about Luffy as a character, which is that he doesn't quit. The relentless nature of fools is highlighted by Dalton, who says, "No matter how much medical science advances and diseases are conquered, there will never be a cure for fools." Such conviction is shown to be one of the main reasons Luffy attracts allies so easily. For example, when Fujitora says, "You're a fool, Straw Hat, but an honest one. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that everyone wants to take your side." The Fool is related to death in One Piece as well. There seems to be some connection between death and sacrifice and reigniting the era, depicted through flame imagery. If anyone is familiar with Dark Souls lore, you should be pretty at home with all of that stuff. Rayleigh says in the last moments of his life, he turned his fading flame of life into a huge fire that enveloped the world. I've never laughed more than on that day. I've never cried more than on that day. I've never drank more either. He was our captain, and he was a magnificent man. So here we have a focus on the last moments of life and a flame of life. This strongly evokes the whole Merry Klabauterman situation, whereby the last remnants of the Merry manifested as a physical spirit, which is Klabauterman. In Whitebeard's Omega speech, he tells the reader, you may eradicate their bloodline, but their flame never dies, hinting that the world government has been trying to prevent this reignition by eradicating bloodlines. Throughout One Piece, Oda shows us that it's not nature, aka bloodlines, that foster a person's ideals, but nurture, for example through Nami and Belmia, Sanji and Zeph, Sabo Garp, Big Mom Carmel, Stroizen, etc, etc, all of whom were brought up by adult figures, or were the ones bringing up the children, despite not having a biological connection. In the same speech, Whitebeard tells us the cycle has been going on for a long time, and it's the weight of the cycle which will lead someone to break it. Specifically, he says, and someday, bearing the weight of all of these generations, a man will appear to challenge this world. He then confirms it's Luffy that Oda's pointing at here, saying, when somebody finds that treasure, the world will be turned upside down. So we know it's the Joy Boy figure. Another way that Oda shows a fool's determination is not only through death, but by mockery also. The two elements combine in the scene where Hirulek sacrifices himself, leading to the overthrowing of Wopple's reign of Drum Kingdom. Right before he dies, Hirulek is mocked as a fool by Wopple's subordinate. This is embodied by the quote, if you want to laugh at that fool, then laugh at me too, by Charlotte Katakuri after fighting Luffy and reconsidering his own values. Noland and Usopp's characters are known to be intrinsically linked, with both being botanists and infamous liars, as well as sharing number ties, and they embody this aspect of the fool. Interestingly, Noland is connected to Jaya, which is home to Mocktown, which, considering its name, is likely to play a role later in the story. This definitely fits with ideas surrounding Joy Boy's connections to Jaya and the Sky Island. Of course, mockery is a classic take on a fool, just with clowns. In summary, the fool isn't just an idiot, it's a character archetype full of potential, transformation, and a leap into the unknown. Whether they succeed through optimism, like Luffy, or disrupt everything around them, such as with Buggy or the Joker, they represent the unpredictability of life and the courage to take the next step. That said, there are greater risks to being a fool. Robin tells us fools who don't respect the past are doomed to repeat it, which is one of many quotes that Robin has connecting her to repeating eras. The point here, though, is to tell us that Joy Boy figures have failed in the past, leading to an unbroken cycle, whereby Imu is at the top. We can also infer, however, that if Luffy doesn't make the same mistake, then he will in fact be the fool that breaks the cycle. Brook foreshadows what the main mistake may have been when the Soul King says to the Soul Queen, Big Mom, what kind of fool plans to die? We can presume Joy Boy died, and I've discussed in previous videos that death ties into self-sacrifice, the immortal surgery, and Imu. Kaido, amongst many other characters, explained to the reader death is an integral part of the journey when he says death is what completes a person during his fight with Luffy, and from this we can infer that Luffy does need to die, but at the right time. Countless examples of Joy Boy figures dying in One Piece, which I've covered before, and each one adds a piece to the puzzle of what happens specifically with Joy Boy. For example, Noland died frowning, Fisher Tiger died because of the hate he has for humans, Hirulek sacrificed himself, etc, etc, etc. Now, Luffy has to avoid the same pitfalls as these other Joy Boy figures if he does wish to succeed in his dream, subsequently changing the era. Now, this takes us into the next level because Luffy doesn't want to change the era. In fact, in terms of quotes, Luffy has given us less direct statements that he wants to change the world than pretty much any other character. But there is something we do know he wants to achieve. Still unknown to the reader is Luffy's dream, which will be the vehicle Oda uses to drive the changes of the world that need to take place in order for the will of D to be fulfilled. So let's follow the thread and see how a fool like Luffy's dream can cause the world to change. We've gathered that Luffy is thematically a fool. He's on a fool's errand with a fool's hope to find fool's gold, aka the One Piece. Throughout the story, quotes confirm that whoever finds it becomes Pirate King, and the Pirate King is the freest person in the world. Luffy believes becoming Pirate King will make his dream come true as well. So to find out more, we can follow the clues Oda's left about dreaming. This brings us to a slick OG theorist who's been cooking for quite a while, named Sly. Those familiar with the channel will know I've spoken ad nauseum about dreams and how they affect the One Piece world, but here we're looking into something a little different. Oda seems to have used something quite specific when sending a message about Luffy's foolish dream, which is rainbows. Throughout One Piece, rainbows frequently appear alongside people pursuing their dreams. Luffy is shown sleeping under a rainbow while dreaming of food. Another scene shows the Straw Hats on clouds that represents their personal desires. Luffy eating, Zoro resting on his swords, Nami lounging on a pile of treasure. Even their pillows reflect the colours of the rainbow. This also ties into the idiom chasing rainbows, which refers to pursuing something impossible. So we can see the connection between chasing rainbows and being a fool, and the fool's errand that we were talking about before, right? The song Bink Sake appears in direct connection to Rainbow. Brook sings it on the Rainbow Bridge in Elbaf, and again right before the Straw Hats encounter a round rainbow. The song itself is about endless dreams, reinforcing the idea that dreams and rainbows are connected. Okay, so there's clearly a connection between rainbows and dreams, but it gets very interesting when you look at Luffy's example. In pretty much all of them, Luffy is eating meat. We see Zoro depicted with swords, in some way or another, evoking his dream of becoming the best swordsman. So does this mean Luffy just wants to eat all the meat there is? On the Rainbow Bridge in Elbaf, Harry talks about hunting the rare moose for Luffy, again evoking dreamy meat vibes. What's strange here though is that in the Elbaf arc, it's confirmed that Luffy doesn't want to eat not just any meat, when Zoro says to Luffy about eating the animals that were defeated by Shamrock in the underworld. Luffy explicitly and aggressively says he would not eat meat if it's from his friends. So Luffy's dream isn't to eat all the meat or something like that. Considering Luffy thinks he needs to be Pirate King to fulfill his dream, it's not a simple case of Luffy just wanting some meat either. Okay, but to solve the riddle, we go back to Luffy being a fool. Luffy says this about Wano: I made a promise to my friend Tama, who gave me her food, that I'll make this country a place where she can eat as much as she wants. If I can't fulfill that promise, this country will be an eternal hell. This illustrates how Luffy has pretty much zero care or respect for any form of politics, but also that it's food specifically that played a role in his motivation to free the country of Wano. Most One Piece readers are probably aware food has been given to Luffy throughout the story, and it usually has the same effect as in Wano, so perhaps Luffy's foolish dream is to feed everybody else. Not long ago I dropped a video about Roger's dream, and one of the conclusions was that we know Roger's dream was not actually about himself, but in fact about the rest of the world and everyone else. So this fits the idea that Luffy might dream of feeding the world rather than himself, and also aligns with sun symbology throughout history, as the sun is often worshipped for bringing about a harvest, for example. However, this isn't everything. The details of Luffy's dreams are revealed through other characters' dreams too. Big Mom is a Joy Boy figure and dreams of a tea party where different races are equal. Otohime wanted fishmen and humans to be equal. In contrast, Enel wanted to affirm his god status and return to his motherland. Okay, so food is of interest to Luffy, but doesn't seem to actually play a role in the dream. Instead, food is symbolic in One Piece for Luffy meeting new people, trading with them, and ultimately becoming friends with them. This is foreshadowing for what Luffy's dream truly is. So far, we only know a couple of things about Luffy's dream for sure. Firstly, it made Shanks cry. So presumably it has something to do with Roger, and perhaps the words Roger said to Shanks that made him cry as a child. Ace and Sabo are the only other two people to have heard the dream prior to Wano, and they both laughed. According to Usopp, who embodies the average human here, Luffy's dream seems impossible to achieve, and Usopp doesn't know how he even thought it up to begin with. Interestingly, the important part of Luffy's dream is the end, highlighted when Luffy says, "That's what I want at the end of my dream." Luffy's dream embodies foolishness, and he thought of it as a child. What this means is that his dream seems simple to him but ties back into the most important themes of the Void Century. Others, such as Otohime, Big Mom, and Dalton, tell us the dream ties to some sort of new place or nation where all races are equal. Sacrifices from characters such as Dalton and Pedro tell us Luffy's dream is something that will be passed on also, or in other words, will live on after Luffy dies. There's barely any marine presence during what we've seen of Luffy's childhood, so it's unlikely Luffy's dream involves the world government. From Roger, we know the dream isn't actually about Luffy, but about everyone else. With all that said, it might sound strange, but Luffy's dream could be to turn everyone in the world into pirates. Notice how many of Luffy's allies he's made on the way become wanted, or even unalived, by the world government, as if they've become pirates. The costume changes in Wano that turn people into samurai is a nod to the idea of people having their images changed. Luffy's dream completely undermines the way the world government operates and the status quo they have projected over the world. By Luffy making everyone a pirate, it means that everyone is villainized, kinda resetting the status quo by default. This is embodied mainly by our three Sake brothers, with Ace, the son of the Pirate King from the previous era, dying first, Luffy sacrificing himself to bring the dawn, leaving Sabo the converted celestial dragon to tell the tale of One Piece, which fits his dream. This is why Vivi is such a key factor to the Straw Hats. She embodies something akin to Sabo as one of the 20 kingdoms. Vivi parallels Lily's rebellion against Imu's agenda. The fact that Luffy will turn her into a pirate is the ultimate manifestation of Luffy's dream, again turning the villains into the heroes. We see this in chapter 1149 with Gunko, demonstrating how it's Imu's influence that turns people into villains. So, in other words, by doing this, the villains of our story, the world government and celestial dragons, are no longer villains, which is a twist on the fact that the world government villainized pirates, which Luffy was. But how does this work in the narrative? Well, think of it like this. What do the world government do to get people to hunt pirates? They give people bounties. What did Cross Guild do to get people to hunt marines? Bounties. Ergo, if Luffy says in some way that the world government are pirates, the people might rebel against them, even if he doesn't intend it. Now, some might be thinking this could have some pretty violent consequences, what with everyone becoming a pirate. But in Romance Dawn, there's a distinction made between two types of pirates. One are violent, plundering pirates, and the others are adventurers. Luffy says his goal is to be one of the adventuring type of pirates, which is what this theorized dream would be describing. Roger's final words sent people from around the world out to sea on an adventure to find his supposed treasure. It could be that the origins of the ancient kingdom were open and free tradeways between nations, eventually falling into one big society that crumbled. You'd think Luffy's dream in some way evokes or reimagines the ancient kingdom, and Vegapunk did tell us that Joy Boy was the first pirate, so piracy definitely could play a major role. As we all know, Luffy is an embodiment of Joy Boy. This implies Joy Boy was also a fool. From previous Den Den videos, we can speculate Joy Boy had a fool's hope after hearing stories of heroes. He likely went on a fool's errand whereby he learned the truth of the world, foreshadowed by Law, who says you can only see the full picture when you step out of the frame. In doing so, Joy Boy likely realized the truth about wealth, fame, and power, which is where Roger's first scene comes in. Fools or adventurers don't care about wealth, fame, or power. Otherwise, Luffy would have let Rayleigh tell him everything he needed to know about getting to Laugh Tale. Page 1 foreshadows this when it says, the Great Age of Piracy. So far, we've had the Age of Heavens, the Age of the Sea Circle, and now we have the Age of Piracy. This is why Roger yearned to be alive during Joy Boy's era. It was an era of adventure and discovery. As such, Luffy will restore an era of adventure by creating a new world. This will be the All Blue. The new inhabitants will all be adventurers of the sea, with none being demonized or criminalized for wanting to explore. This naturally implies the destruction of the Red Line, which is why Oda has the quote saying, "By the end of my dream." The full sentence would read, "By the end of my dream, I want everyone to be a pirate." So, the world government encourages the destruction of all other cultures and ways of living to create one perfect way everyone must adhere to. This is the world government's version of equality. Luffy's version is the inverse of this, instead with everyone being imperfect, highlighted in the quote, "Don't ever think there's any perfect society made by humans. If you think that way, you'll overlook the enemy. Don't be fooled by appearances," by Smoker in chapter 569. This sense of humility is also portrayed by Fujitora, who says, if you lose credibility by just admitting fault, then you didn't have any in the first place, in chapter 799. A fool's errand refers to a pointless, impossible, or doomed task, something that seems to have no chance of success. The phrase suggests someone is wasting their time, chasing an illusion, or acting on false hope. The characters that embody this characteristic in One Piece relentlessly resist the world government's grip, eventually overthrowing it. Oda leaves tons of clues telling us this, such as Luffy calling people baka, meaning idiot or fool. Being strong isn't just about having power or moving fast. The strongest is the one who stands firm, even if it means taking a beating, is said by Charlotte Katakuri in chapter 895, meaning Buggy, Usopp, and Cricket are the characters we're referring to, as all three are chastised as fools, and Buggy and Usopp have physically taken some serious beatings. And with that, we're pretty much done. Luffy has a foolish dream, which is for everyone to become pirates, like him. Make sure you're subbed, and in the description you can find some quick links to some of our newest and best videos. Join the Discord if you want to get deeper into the theory community, or even if you want to recommend a theory. If you made it this far, you've just won some Southbird eggs, so let me know where you want them delivered in the comments and we'll drop them to you. Read a book, water your plants, and Guten Tag. Once Luffy's fruit was revealed to be a Hito Nomi instead of a Paramecia, it gave us room to speculate that other devil fruits in the series may also have hidden secrets. Additionally, Luffy's transformation into Gear 5 revealed some things that the reader has seen before, such as the white scarf, which gives us an idea of where to start looking. It could be that there's one Hito for each category or something like that, so Luffy's Gomu for Paramecia, Blackbeard's Yami for Logia, and Enel's Goru for Zone. Or maybe it ties to the gods referenced in the Skypiea arc, so the forest god, rain god, earth god, and sun god. We know that scenes like this are intricately woven with detail. For example, at the Skypiea scene where they mention the gods, it's raining, which it never usually is in One Piece. We also see a flame, we also see some forest, and we also see a beheading, which seems to pertain to sun gods in One Piece, as I've discussed in previous videos, particularly around serpents. The Elbaf arc recently revealed that lightning and fire are the Adam Tree's weakness, an absolute nuclear drop thanks to Loki's brother Harudine, who just so happens to have entered a tournament to get a fire devil fruit and become the king of Elbaf. So, what does this tell us about the royal devil fruit of Elbaf and Loki's fruit? And is it actually time for our boy Slim Shady to make his comeback? For years, One Piece fans have speculated that Prince Loki of Elbaf will play a huge role in the endgame of the story, and now we're finally seeing it manifest. But what if we're looking into the wrong character when it comes to the royal devil fruit that Loki was supposed to inherit? What if the true wielder of the fruit is actually Enel? It's funny because when the drop first came out, I've been in the theory sphere for years, and so I just presumed everyone was going to be talking about this. But months later and no one has, and when I looked into it, it turns out there's some absolute massive reveals we've got coming up relating to this whole situation. The idea dives deep into the hidden connections between Enel, Elbaf, and some secrets of Norse symbolism that Oda has woven into the story. If Enel's return is truly coming, then this could be the missing piece that changes the circumstances and leads to the main war. Stick around as we decode Oda's foreshadowing, analyze hidden clues, and unravel the real truth behind the Elbaf royal devil fruit. Leave a comment with some hate if you think Enel definitely isn't going to return, or whether or not you think he's connected to Elbaf, and we'll break this down together. Don't forget to like and sub and hit the bell if you love the deep dive One Piece series, and let's crack on.
Ever wonder how Din Din can drop secrets like this and still be alive to tell the tale, but Cypher Pole and Oda's henchmen always on the lookout? It's because we use private internet access, potentially the greatest invention since sliced bread. Tesla, Nick Fury, Ned Stark, all of these men would have used private internet access if they knew what was coming. Imagine you're sending a message to a friend. Not just any friend, but a friend like Butters.
I've got some splish splashing more.
Nowadays, a VPN is the only way. It's like putting a message in a secure briefcase that it can only be opened by the person that you want to open it. A VPN encrypts your internet connection. That way hackers, government censors, and Crunchyroll usurpers don't have ways to profit from your private and personal tastes. I for one like ramen, but that doesn't mean I want to be recommended books written in ramen. Signing up for PIA is completely risk-free. They offer a 30-day money-back guarantee with 24-hour customer support. And right now you can get 83% off plus 4 free months by using the link below. That's only $2.03 a month. Thanks again to Private Internet Access for joining the team and helping us find the One Piece. And without further ado, let's get back to solving mysteries.
One of the fruits that's been on my mind, particularly since Luffy's Sun God fruit reveal, like I mentioned, is Enel's. Enel has the Rumble fruit, despite Enel's aptitude being for lightning. The distinction here being that thunder and lightning are different, right? Enel was never really defeated either, but instead just kind of got bored and flew off to his idea of utopia. Oda explicitly surrounded Enel in god symbology and references to the heavens, but there are some strange features about Enel that match our protagonist Luffy. When Luffy entered Gear 5, we began to hear the drums of liberation, a feature that's played a major role ever since. This is reinforced when during that whole scene in Wano there were people actually playing drums with the Tamui symbol on. The Tamui symbol means like heavenly or is in association with heaven. Ironically, Enel also fires electric bolts out of his Taiko Tamui drums from time to time. Enel made several transformations, one of which was a type of Buddha, and it just so happened to be adorned with a huge white scarf like Luffy. At one point, Luffy's form was described to be like a Buddha. I doubt it's coincidence that in these forms they both do the exact same pose. Oda even had Enel restart his own heart in a super similar style to the way Luffy did it. Furthermore, I've speculated before, revival is actually a side effect of having a Hito Nomi. Luffy's Gomu is associated with the number 5-6, and Enel's Goro is also associated with the same 5-6, 5 meaning go and 6 meaning row, which is further highlighted by Enel's birthday being May the 6th, so 5-6, the day after Luffy's. So the numbers here do clue us in that there is a deeper connection going on. Now it gets even deeper when we consider Luffy was immune to Enel's lightning abilities because Luffy's made of rubber. However, as we know, he's not actually made of rubber, allowing feats such as throwing huge bolts of lightning during Wano. From this we can infer that Enel's fruit is actually not lightning or thunder, but something else, something the song god Nika is immune to. The similarities between Luffy and Enel tell us that the fruit is likely a Hito, and considering the name Sun God Nika, I think it's safe to assume Enel's devil fruit is similarly a god devil fruit. This fits with other theories surrounding the idea that Chopper has the forest god fruit, as his fruit is not only a Hito, it's actually called the Hito Nomi. And also, as a quick aside, just tying back into the drums, obviously Chopper is from Drum Island, right? So there does seem to be a relationship between drums, gods, and devil fruits. There is a deeper meaning behind the fact that the Hito Nomis have associations with gods, but Hito means human, and devil fruits are like the technology between humans and gods, right? Like the Promethean flame, humans attain a power that's too much, which is devil fruits, and then it ends up being the same power that destroys them. So there's relevance there, but I guess it's not important to this particular theory. So in summary, I'd go as far as to say it's very likely that Enel actually has a god fruit shown by the divine themes surrounding him, such as the design that he has strongly evoking the image of the classical Japanese thunder deity Raijin. The elongated earlobes also resemble many depictions of Buddha, and of course, Monkey D. Luffy being Enel's natural enemy due to his devil fruit's immunity is highly appropriate, as the family of D is referred to as God's natural enemy, and Enel believes himself to be a god, which Oda even goes as far as to say his favourite food is apples, as in the fruit of the Garden of Eden, right? So I don't think there's many people sort of speculating whether or not Enel's supposed to depict a god-type figure. He definitely is. The question is whether or not this god-type figure is relevant to the narrative, such as Luffy's transformation. In my previous video, I discussed the intimate ties between Elbaf and Skypiea, particularly Burka, which is where Enel is from. Elbaf and Burka are shown in a ton of ways to be deeply connected, likely via the Bridge of the Higher West, facilitating a lot of shared technology and knowledge. So Enel, a Burkan, most definitely is going to have ties to Elbaf in some form at some point, which then brings him into the Royal Devil Fruit. But as I say, if you want more details on them specifics, then check out the previous video on Asgard. Now, when Mother Carmel was in Elbaf, she was feeding intelligence to the world government. During this period, Loki was born, which was news around Mother Carmel's local village. Loki is the Prince of Elbaf, tying him to the duty of protecting the royal devil fruit, a duty traditionally upheld by the kings of Elbaf. Considering Mother Carmel's activity at the time, it's likely she informed the world government that Loki had been born, and that the royal devil fruit may soon be passed down. 10 years later, Loki pretty much takes over the underworld as a child, making friends with animals and demonstrating immense strength, much like we are shown with Odin and Luffy's formative years. Now, this is where it gets a little weirder. 39 years after that, Harold is killed by Loki, and Loki is implied to have eaten the royal devil fruit. What's weird about this is that Enel was born 39 years ago. Perhaps a coincidence, but it begins a pattern between the two once we see that Loki was born 63 years ago, which is a flip on the 3-9. All sounds a bit reachy at the moment, but it starts to come together when we consider the fact that Enel ate the Goro only a couple years before Shanks went after Loki and tied him to the Adam Tree. There could be some sort of mix-up going on whereby Shanks thought he was tying up Loki, who has the royal devil fruit, when really Enel has escaped to the moon with it. The royal devil fruit of Elbaf being Enel's Goro. Goro and fruit is foreshadowed when Haradin says, "Have you ever seen a giant with a Logia?" The parallel in Dressrosa goes deeper when we consider Loki's brother left Elbaf to enter a tournament. seems a bit random until you consider the fact the prize was the Mera Nomi. Now, why is the flame fruit important to giants? Well, it's because it's one of the weaknesses of the Adam Tree, just like lightning. The parallel is all but confirmed when Harridan says, with the Mera fruit, I'll have the power to become the king of Elbaf. And a little extra detail here is it's Loki, aka Joy Boy, whose brother, Harridan, goes to fetch the Mera, which was the fruit of Ace, which is Luffy, aka Joy Boy's brother. So you can see what Oda's done there. But in summary, what we're saying is Harridan left Elbaf, sailed the sea to Dressrosa, entered the tournament so he could essentially attain a devil fruit that specifically has a weakness to the Adam Tree. Now, this completely seems to reflect the situation with Loki, because Loki went out to sea. There's relevance to him and the Royal Devil Fruit, and interestingly, now we've seen him use his Thunder Bagua, it shows that he can produce lightning without a Devil Fruit. Now, Harold was explicitly said to be killed by Loki over his Royal Devil Fruit. Death like this is rare in One Piece, so we can tell there is a reason Oda brings it up. Seeing as the conflict surrounds an important Devil Fruit, the reader can infer that Harold's death ties into this fruit. In other words, the fruit got reincarnated, as is the way with devil fruits when the user dies in One Piece, and for some reason there's importance around this particular event. The idea is added to by the fact that Loki went to sea for unknown reasons, which the reader can infer was to search for the Royal Devil Fruit, ergo he didn't actually eat it himself. Now, Enel conquered Skypiea 8 years ago, which is the same year he ate the Goro, telling us that he conquered Skypiea specifically to find the Devil Fruit, and additionally suggesting that the fruit actually reincarnates at Elbaf, which might be tied to the Giant Jack. Particularly when you think about the fact that there's 4 God Devil Fruits, then you've got an Adam Tree, Eve Tree, Whale Tree, and Giant Jack, all 4 of which are the only living giant trees or plants on the planet. Some might ask at this point how Enel would know that the Devil Fruit respawns in Skypiea, but it's worth bearing in mind that somehow Enel knew how to build the Arc Maxim, somehow he knew about the Fairy Birth, and this isn't just like a little bit of information, this is Oda alluding to the fact that Enel's getting some information from somewhere, it's just the reader is not partial to that information. So it's not a stretch to believe that Enel would have some deep or hidden knowledge surrounding a super important fruit, particularly if it's the one that he requires to power his people's technology. And in my previous video I did speculate that we're going to find out some of this stuff, or touch on it at least, very soon as we go higher up the Adam Tree, and it will be soon, I think. The Elbafians believe Loki killed his father and stole the Devil Fruit, but recently Loki suggested not everything is as it appears. Ja Rule was present when Loki supposedly killed Harold, and it resulted with him having a sword embedded in his head. Interestingly, this mirrors what we saw with Ja Rule's counterpart, Jorul, and Big Mom. Jorul called her the god of destruction and attacked Linlin, but was easily beaten and subsequently died. We know for certain that conflict did take place during whatever happened, as Jorul now has a sword embedded deep into his head. Notably, Loki doesn't use a sword, so it could be Harold's weapon that's embedded in Ja Rule's head. This would mean one of two things: either Ja Rule is hiding something, or the strike to Ja Rule's head has affected his memory, like we saw with Big Mom and the amnesia stuff. The fact Loki left straight after, and as such no one's spoken to him about what actually took place, seems to be pretty convenient circumstances from Oda, again adding to the idea that something more went down. We saw this cool panel when an entire village had to be sacrificed when a branch was cut off the Adam Tree to stop fire spreading. I thought about whether this might be relevant, and I checked in the chapter, and fascinatingly the following panels are literally Ja Rule getting slapped in the sword that's stuck in his head before Usopp makes a joke about pulling out Excalibur, so I would not be surprised at all if this fire was caused 14 years ago by the same conflict that killed Harold. Okay, so far we can be sure that there's more to the Royal Devil Fruit than we think. Enel might be connected, and Enel certainly is connected to Elbaf. Through Oda's divine imagery surrounding Enel, we can speculate that Enel has deeper ties to gods than just the appearance, the secret to which might lie in his devil fruit. After all, as I mentioned, it did power the Maxim and take it all the way to the moon, and it allowed Enel to revive himself and change into Buddha forms. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Now, there's something about the Royal Devil Fruit that doesn't fit what we know about Devil Fruits so far in the story. The readers were told the Royal Devil Fruit of Elbaf is passed down from generation to generation. So, does this mean the giants have some way of containing a Devil Fruit's respawn once the Devil Fruit user dies? Weirdly enough, we have one example of Devil Fruits tying to Elbaf, and it just so happens to have been respawned in a controlled manner. I'm talking about Carmel's Sorrow Fruit. Big Mum ate Carmel and subsequently had the exact same abilities Mother Carmel had, telling us Big Mum gained her abilities from consuming a devil fruit user. Something similar happened with Blackbeard when he took Whitebeard's fruit, so is this the same secret used by the Elbathian royal family? The dilemma is, either the royal family of Elbaf are consuming each other, which is not very likely, or they are not actually eating the fruit. In case of the latter, we ask, why was Loki beefing with his old man over the fruit? Elbaf is renowned for not being under the rule of the world government, but considering all the allusions to a change in era, then perhaps Elbaf had in fact been infiltrated by the world government, and Harold became compromised. This seems more in line with the themes of One Piece and also fits well with the idea of the status quo being a lie, such as with Kyros in Dressrosa. Operations by Carmel confirm attempts by the world government to infiltrate Elbaf for the past 100 years. Considering what we've said in this video so far, it's most likely that despite Carmel's untimely demise, the world government has in fact managed to infiltrate Elbaf and manipulate Harold. This is strongly evidenced by the fact God's Knights can somehow appear at Elbaf using the summoning circle connected to the Abyss, something that was presumably impossible before, considering Elbaf's status of not being affiliated under the world government. We've seen experiments to recreate giants in a few forms, demonstrating giants are not only sought after by the world government, but are also very powerful, highlighted by Queen's creation of the numbers. As I mentioned, the Abyss seems to connect to the summoning circle, so knowing Oda, it's possible this foreshadows that Harold was interacting with the Abyss. The incident between Harold and Loki took place 14 years ago, which is the same year there was a ton of movement from the world government, such as the experiments performed on Ginny. If you're familiar with my Nozdro vid, you'll know I've spoke about Orochi and how his influence under Kaido foreshadows Nozdra's influence under Imu. I think it's most likely that this is what's happening with the Harold and Loki situation. Harold had probably been compromised by the world government, perhaps he was tempted by the Abyss, which would explain why he'd attacked Ja Rule. I think Harold ate the devil fruit when it was forbidden. Loki killed Harold, who was about to go on a rampage, displacing the royal devil fruit. I think then Enel knew about what happened and went in search for it, subsequently finding and eating the Goronomi. Considering the reveal of the mural, I think it's more likely now than ever that we'll see the Maxim again, and it might be what's used to destroy Uranus. So does this mean Enel is coming back? As I say, if it is going to happen, now is the time, so fingers crossed. Okay, so in summary, this theory explores the idea that Enel's Goro is not just a powerful Logia, but actually the royal devil fruit of Elbaf. The argument stems from parallels mainly between Norse mythology and Elbaf's history, as well as this whole Haradian situation, which is wild. One main element to this theory is that Enel's fruit is actually a Hitonomi, and Oda might reveal that the other gods Oda mentioned in Skypiea connect to other Hitonomis. I predict that Harold was compromised via the Abyss. He was convinced to eat the royal devil fruit, which is usually forbidden. Ja Rule guards the fruit as a duty, hence how he gets the sword in his head. Loki doesn't use swords, right? So the sword in his head affects Ja Rule's memory, but it will probably be removed. That's why Usopp called it Excalibur, right? Because the sword and the stone. Removing it will give us the confirmation that Loki killed Harold because he ate the fruit that was about to go on a rampage. This is what caused the fire on the branch that had to be cut off. Because Loki killed Harold, the fruit is displaced for the first time in probably over 800 years, potentially thousands of years. And once Enel becomes aware, he goes after it. He then conquers Skypiea, discovers it, and eats it. Okay, and with that, guys, I'm going to leave it there. We've got loads more videos coming, so I'll probably keep touching on this whole Berka, Skypiea, Elbaf relationship and just adding to it. But it wouldn't surprise me if we get some pretty big, surprise confirmations soon. If any of you are familiar with how the chapters work during the seasons and throughout the year, then we are actually expecting something quite big pretty soon, so that's cool. The Discord is absolutely popping with theorists at the moment and real, just sound people. So jump in, get involved, share some music if you want, share your theories, share your thoughts, do whatever. Apologies if the quality was a bit off on the last edit. That was us trialing a new editor and stuff like that, and he's got better since, so don't worry. If you've made it this far, you've won a deck of cards signed by Hawkins, so just let me know in the comments where you want it delivered. Make sure you're cool to your neighbours, stroke a cat, and toodle Pippenstein. After 20 years, we finally get confirmation of something we've been talking about on the channel for a long time, which is that Hiraluk saw Xebec sacrifice himself with a smile at God Valley. We'll break down exactly why we know this is the case, but it also sheds light on the idea that Garp and Xebec had a significant relationship, and Blackbeard might use Pudding to unlock a frozen Garp's memories in order to reveal this to the reader. This week's One Piece chapter 1145 gave us something rare and loaded with narrative weight, a scene featuring both Rocksteady Xebec and Prince Loki. Given how little we've seen of Rocks across the entire series, any appearance is pretty significant. There's a cool moment that reflects Whitebeard and Blackbeard's initial interaction, saying, "I didn't come all this way to take in a brat like you." But what really stands out here is the chapter number itself. 1145. It's a subtle but powerful callback to chapter 145, the iconic Drum Island moment where Dr. Hiruluk sacrifices himself. Hiruluk was in the West Blue during the same year as the God Valley incident, which is also in the West Blue. At the time, he was a thief, but after witnessing some unknown event, Hiruluk changed his ways. Additionally, Hiruluk tells us that what he'd witnessed somehow revealed a cure for a sickness of the heart, which is shown alongside Sakura imagery. In chapter 145, Hiruluk sacrifices himself willingly in an explosion that creates the image of a large Sakura tree, suggesting what Hiruluk saw was some form of self-sacrifice, strongly highlighted by Hiruluk's speech at the time about what it means to die. With the reveal of Rocks in 1145, it all but confirms what Hiruluk was discussing exactly 1000 chapters prior was Xebec at God Valley. If this is true, this tells us that Xebec sacrificed himself at the God Valley incident, contradicting the monster the world governments portrayed Xebec to be. This is further evidenced in 145 when Hiruluk says, "A monster is coming, please don't hurt him, he's my son." If you go and look back at that scene, that like the whole Chopper running towards them and a soldier says, "Look, there's a monster coming, he's not human, it's a monster, blah blah blah," you can just feel the Xebec vibes when you reread it.
People love to doom scroll, and I'm sure you fall into that group. So why haven't you downloaded Polybuzz yet? It's pretty fun chatting with anime characters when I'm bored. The app is smooth as butter and customization as easy as clicking the link in the description, and if that somehow gets boring, you can make your own characters to talk to. Maybe you've just binged Fast and the Furious and want to talk about family with Vin Diesel. I know I'm not the only one that talks to themselves, right? Right? Lately I've been trying to stay off my phone, but I'd be lying if I said Polybuzz hasn't made it a tad bit more difficult. Don't cheat yourself, treat yourself. Check out the link and use our code to unlock premium features. Now what are you waiting for? Gojo's waiting for you.
Yo, 久しぶり.
Oda has long used chapters as hidden markers or callbacks, and the similarity between 1145 and 145 feels pretty intentional. Chapter 145 focuses on misunderstood monsters, legacy, and parental love, a theme that may now reflect not just Chopper's story but something much bigger, the complicated and hidden relationship between Garp and Rocksteady Xebec. Notably, the chapter is called Carrying on His Will. We've covered the connections between Garp and Xebec a couple times before, and 1145 definitely adds to this, such as when Xebec calls Loki a brat, a phrase we've talked about in previous videos mostly being attributed to Garp in the One Piece series. A huge clue to all this is the events that took place at the Rocky Port incident. Essentially, we saw Garp take on a rogue pupil, and we also saw him sacrifice himself in order for Kobe to become the next hero of the Marines. Now, Garp got his epithet of Hero of the Marines after the God Valley incident, telling us something similar happened with Garp and someone else at God Valley. In other words, Garp was saved by someone at the God Valley incident. It's been alluded to a few times that Roger was not engaged in their fight, but instead was doing something else, highlighted in the imagery of Garp stood alone protecting the Marines. From this, we can presume it was Xebec that sacrificed himself to allow Garp to become the hero of the Marines. Okay, so in the quote above from Hiruluk in chapter 145, I mentioned Hiruluk calling Chopper his son. Does this mean Garp's is Rock's son? No. How do we know this? Well, we can examine the parallel with Hiruluk to glean a clearer image of what relationship Garp had with Xebec. A monster is coming, he's my son, please don't hurt him, is the only time that Hiruluk calls Chopper his son directly. Of course, we know he isn't actually his son because he's a reindeer, right? So there's not going to be some twist in the story where Chopper is actually Hiruluk's real child or anything like that, but there is something more to this. In previous videos we've looked at Doc Q and how he's clearly tied to Hiruluk on a very deep level. In many ways the character contrasts Chopper as well, such as Doc Q looking super old but only being in his 20s compared to Chopper who is as old as reindeers can be but appears really childish. So let's take a little detour into the connections and check out the family tree. Hiruluk resembles Doc Q. They're both introduced in Drum Island flashbacks. Their noses are oddly similar, they both use bombs, Both are medical chemists. They both have makeup on their eyes, and yes, Doc Q just so happens to be wearing 3/4 and a hat, showing off the same hairy legs we get from Hairy Look. We know Hiruluk had a sickness, and that Doc Q was also born with a sickness. Finally, Doc Q mentions luck in a few quotes, which might be a nod towards Hiruluk's name, which, by the way, we still don't have the full version of. So, Hiruluk could be Doc Q's father, split up at birth. It could even be the case that their separation is some sort of love sickness, which Hiruluk describes as a sickness of the heart. If so, then sacrificing himself for his adopted son Chopper would surely be an appropriate cure, right? So in summary, we see Hiruluk, a likely parallel of Xebec, with a real son that's displaced and an adopted son that is from an entirely different species. So Chopper is Garp in this situation, Xebec's adopted son, cut from a completely different cloth from each other. Naturally, this begs the question, did Xebec have a real son? And we could speculate yes and think it's Dragon or Roger, but that's for you guys in the comments to just go to war over, because it would just be too much for this little video. So is Xebec perhaps Garp's mentor? It was Garp's pupil that defeated him at the Rocky Port incident, so it could be the case. We might even get a connection between Ayakiji's line about not being able to use Haki and Xebec's ability, considering Xebec's strange, speculated ties to devil fruits. Garp went to Rocky Port to save an imprisoned Kobe, and we know there were prisoners at the God Valley incident, so we can assume that Xebec's sacrifice had something to do with these prisoners or freeing these prisoners. Roger escaped with Shanks inside a treasure chest on his ship. If we wanted to reach a little, we could speculate that Xebec and Garp worked together to prevent their ship from being destroyed. Some theorize Shanks as being Xebec's son, such as GT in our Discord server linked below. This would certainly fit the idea, so it is food for thought. So there is certainly evidence strongly implying Xebec sacrificed himself at the God Valley incident to perpetuate his dream through Garp, subsequently making Garp the hero of the Marines and demonizing Xebec as a monster. Furthermore, it appears the world government tricked Xebec into going to God Valley, from two main bits of evidence. Firstly, Hiruluk was tricked to going to the top of the Rockies, and also because Garp explicitly said that it's obvious that Xebec would go after whoever stole the pirate crown jewel. So to me, there's no doubt Xebec was not this all super evil monster the world government portrayed him as. There's currently some back and forth surrounding Xebec being a potential Joy Boy or Nika figure. There is certainly Joy Boy imagery surrounding Hiruluk, such as the sake he pours in his final moments, and the scene also evokes Nika when Hiruluk says, "Even if I'm gone, my dream will come true. The sick hearts of this country's citizens will also be saved." If Xebec does indeed have elements of Joy Boy and Nika, and was Garp's father figure or mentor, then it would mean that he has some pretty direct influence over Luffy, considering Garp was the one who trained Luffy. One more significance here is that one of the most important aspects of Joy Boy and Nika is they live on through memory, such as in stories and legends. Hiruluk's final words suggest he saw someone die, but that person lived on through someone's memory. Blackbeard's ship is called the Sabre of Xebec, so Teach certainly reveres Xebec's memory. Big Mom has memories of Carmel's past, indicating Carmel can influence Big Mom in some way through memory. Does this mean that Xebec secretly lives on through Blackbeard's memory? Well, Blackbeard has Pudding. This means he can use her abilities to look into a currently captured Garp's memories and discover more about the truth surrounding Xebec. This might give Blackbeard the insight he needs to stop LARPing as Xebec and finally become Xebec's successor, like a dark version of Garp. This would play into what we currently see in Elbaf, with nightmares and a dark version of Nika, highlighting how perception is important in One Piece. In the end, chapter 1145 has just got me thinking about Oda's sort of questions surrounding what truly makes someone a monster, and more importantly, who gets to decide. Maybe Rox wasn't the villain history says he was. Maybe Garp didn't defeat an enemy but someone he cared about. And maybe Blackbeard, inheriting the legacy of Xebec, will be the one to uncover the truth and finally put an end to Xebec's cycle. Anywho, that's all for today. Make sure you're subbed, and if you made it this far, you've just won one of the Rockies from Drum Island. So let me know where you want that delivered, and I'll get someone to pour that over ASAP. Take your dog for a walk, enjoy spring, and toodle pipsqueak. In our world, we have distinct continents: Australia, Africa, Europe, America, and so on. But in One Piece, it's different. The most important difference is probably the Redline, a massive red wall that wraps around the entire world. Of course, we could explore the mythological origins of this, such as the Ouroboros, but today we're focusing on how it was made. Since One Piece is a supernatural world, supernatural means could have been involved in creating the Redline in the first place. The Red Line was introduced to us just before the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line. We saw that the world of One Piece is structured around two major lines. The Red Line, which encircles the world, and the Grand Line, which runs perpendicular to it. These two lines clearly interact, for example, at certain key locations, like Reverse Mounting and Marijua. They intersect. This suggests a fundamental connection between the two. Now, when the Straw Hats return to the Red Line later in the story, Nami makes an extremely important observation. She notes that as you follow the Red Line, the weather changes, and not just randomly, the weather changes in a pattern exactly like the Grand Line's islands. For example, if a Grand Line island has a winter climate, it stays a winter island permanently. If an island has a summer climate, it remains a summer island. And the same applies to spring and autumn islands. This tells us something huge. The Red Line isn't just one continuous landmass. It's actually made up of multiple different islands fused together, confirmed during Egghead by Vegapunk. This raises the question, where did these islands come from? In the Grand Line we see about 100 to 200 islands at most. In the Four Blues there might be a few dozen islands. Even if we're generous, the total number of known islands is only in the hundreds or low thousands. Yet Marco in Odin's flashback tells us the world once had tens of thousands of islands. We can assume the answer is that they were fused together to create the Red Line. This means the Red Line is another version of the Ancient Kingdom, the supercontinent originally made out of the islands that now make the Red Line. This is a manifestation of a concept called Theseus' ship. The riddle goes like this. Imagine a ship called the Ship of Theseus, which is gradually repaired over time by replacing its old, decayed planks with new ones. Eventually, every single plank, nail, and part of the ship is replaced. All the old parts are then used to make another ship, leading us to ask, which is the Ship of Theseus out of these two ships? In other words, Imu has rebuilt the Ancient Kingdom after destroying it, but this time in the form of an indestructible red line. The Eve tree sits in the Red Line, which is red like the road poneglyphs, an aspect which Oda chose to highlight in its name. The warriors of Elbaf, the strongest nation in the world, confirm they cannot destroy the Red Line. Meanwhile, the whale Laboon, a creature as large as a Sea King, has been ramming into the Red Line for decades, yet hasn't even dented it. Frankie stated that the treasure tree Adam has never fallen. However, we know it's not actually completely indestructible. It was revealed that the treasure tree can be destroyed using lightning and fire, perhaps indicating how poneglyphs are made. Ironically, this was revealed from Ripley to Frankie, and Frankie was the one who originally said it was indestructible, right? That said, the Adam tree is still extremely durable, as demonstrated by its wood used to build great ships. So the tree is almost indestructible, but somehow wood can be chopped from it. No doubt we'll see one of the Straw Hats, such as Zoro, cut a branch, but nonetheless it evokes imagery relating to poneglyphs, as they are also indestructible, but somehow have letters carved into them. This suggests that the Red Line is made of the same indestructible material as the poneglyphs. And who created the poneglyphs? The Kazuki clan. The Kazuki clan rules Wano, the home of Pluton, a destructive ancient weapon, foreshadowing that Pluton may have some special ability to bring down the Red Line. Now, we could go into the other two ancient weapons and Pluton and take a deeper dive into how they specifically are tied to the formation of the Red Line, but that's for another time. But why is such power needed anyway? Well, it's because, as we mentioned, the Red Line is so explicitly indestructible. If the Red Line was built out of broken bits of supercontinent, then it wasn't always indestructible, however. Not until it was formed into the Red Line and encased the Eve tree. So, is the Eve tree fortifying the wall from the inside? For those familiar with Game of Thrones, this is a popular theory surrounding how the Great Wall in the north is so sturdy. So, to find out more, we take a deeper look into the trees of the One Piece world. I'm getting close to being the oldest living thing on this planet, but on the blue planet, the oldest living thing is confirmed to be the Tree of Ohara, 5,000 years old. Now, what's significant about the fact that it's the oldest? It's because nothing came before that. Ergo, something came from that. If we have to guess what came from a great tree, and it's the oldest thing in the world, we can think perhaps the Adam tree and Eve trees came from the Tree of Knowledge, right? The Tree of Ohara, the oldest living thing, again, in the world. This is foreshadowed in recent chapters where we see a branch that's been cut off of the Adam tree. So imagine you take that branch, you plant it, and strike it with Uranus, as per what the mural shows us. Voila, you have a great tree. Why would Uranus cause a tree to grow? Uranus is Burke and Tech, shown to us through Enel and Maxim. Other Berkentekis with area currently home to Haradas, featured in a cover story explicitly showing us that Haradas can manipulate weather elements to cause plants to grow. Add that to the mural we just mentioned, which depicts something looking like the Maxim striking the tree with a bolt of lightning, which is Enel's power, and you have Oda showing us not only how the trees are destroyed, but how they are also made. Does this mean that the great trees of the One Piece world descend from the tree of knowledge in Ohara? Lore states that Caesar made Smile Devil Fruits via the practical application of lineage factors discovered by Vegapunk. If you consider how a person traces their family lineage, they always refer to this as a family tree, implying that it's very likely that the trees do descend from the original tree of Ohara, which is like the father or the mother plant, you could say. Readers can go as far as to speculate there was supposed to be 2 more great trees, and that they were delivered by whales. Firstly, we see a whale that's been petrified and turned into a giant tree, something that may be related to how poneglyphs were made, which I'll touch on in a sec. Perhaps this whale was transferring a tree when it was shot up by the knock-up stream or sucked up by Zunisha, leaving it tens of thousands of meters in the sky. This is reminiscent of the giant jack, another giant tree that just so happens to sit at the same altitude. Both of these evoke what we saw on the mural about a flying whale, and there have been references in One Piece colour spreads to whales in the sky before. So just as a little aside and to summarise that point, if we consider the base of the Eve tree, that is all the way at the bottom of the ocean, the bottom of the world, right? And then we've got the Adam tree, which sits at sea level. And then we've got the tree on Zunisha, which sits higher than that at sky level. And then we've got Giant Jack, which sits just a little bit higher than that because it's raised on a separate cloud. In the Bible, Eve becomes convinced by a serpent to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. In One Piece, serpents are used to reflect a range of themes, from rebirth to gods as depicted in the Sky Pier mural, and ties to characters like Imu and Joy Boy. It's safe to assume that devil fruits may have a connection to this story, since the serpent convinced Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from a tree. Now we have Adam, Eve, and knowledge. Of course, all 3 trees are biblical references to a degree. So the forbidden knowledge could be, by using technology, i.e. Uranus, you can grow a magical tree that grows magical fruits. Potentially Imu, Joy Boy, or both were kicked out of the ancient kingdom for cutting off a branch of the tree of knowledge. Or was one of them framed by the other, perhaps? This means the forbidden fruit comes from the tree of knowledge, is consumed by Adam and Eve, and they are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So we can see the parallel there, right? The biggest lord on devil fruits comes from Vegapunk, who has an apple on his head, and Caesar used apples to turn into artificial devil fruits. So Oda is definitely drawing parallels from devil fruits and forbidden fruits in the Bible. We know devil fruits grow on trees in One Piece. For example, Luffy stated early in the story he ate the fruit of the Gum Gum tree. The artificial Smile Devil fruits grown in the Smile factory are shown to be growing on trees and bushes, which is reinforced by the majority of devil fruits having stems that they can hang from, implying they came from trees. The artificial fruits growing in the Smile factory demonstrate special, luminescent, elegant sunflowers providing light to the trees for the fruits to grow. This is a nod to the fact that all plants need sunlight to grow, but the relationship between light and devil fruit goes much deeper. You might have heard people talking about that over the years. We've got a video coming out about that in about 2 weeks. Interestingly though, these particular flowers are labelled sunflowers. The sunlight tree, Eve, specialises in absorbing sunlight, which could possibly hint that its enormous amount of sunlight is used in the process of growing the original devil fruit. So just to reiterate that, the sunflowers give light to the fake smiles, and the Eve tree might give light to the original devil fruits. This is possibly what Oda was hinting at when Green Bull was sunbathing in Marijua, right, saying that he hadn't eaten. Particularly if he has got the forest god fruit. Skypiea teaches us trees can inherit souls. The Shandians believe their ancestors' souls reside in trees, guided by the bell of Shandora. If this is the case, then devil fruits may be so powerful because they are the culmination of the souls of the dead. Big Mum's Jolly Roger could imply a tree growing from soul energy. Also, Vegapunk suggests devil fruits come from human desires, adding to this idea. If the mural depicts the Adam tree, then at one point it may have bore devil fruits, possibly implied by the 3 tiers or realms reflecting the 3 classifications of devil fruit, Logia, Zone, and Paramecia. The fact that the treasure tree Adam doesn't have fruit growing on it now may reflect that what we've heard about the world being flipped, and it kind of aligns with stuff like curses, right? That said, friend of the channel Gib pointed out something important. The Elbaf mural seems very specific, thus pretty accurate. In the center we have this tree that many presume to be the Adam tree. However, seeing as it looks completely different to the style of tree we see at the center of Elbaf, it leads us to consider that it may in fact be the Eve tree. In the original panel we see the silhouette of an iron giant at the base of the tree, mirroring what we saw of Emeth coming out of the sea up to Marijwa, which again is above the Eve tree. Additionally, the tree has a different style of leaf than the Adam tree. The tree in the image clearly reaches up to the sky, something that we can presume is the case for both the Adam and the Eve tree, considering Marijwa and Elbaf's location in the clouds. On the mural, Wano appears on the right side of the tree, mirroring what we see of Wano being on the right side of the Eve tree. This goes for Zanisha too. On the left of the tree we see a depiction of Nika, who currently hails from the east, so we can see what Oda's doing there. As a quick aside, one perspective could be that the mural shows the forces of good being distracted by a demon, i.e. the original Yami fruit user, while Imu takes over the Eve tree. Now, continuing on this topic of trees, ever notice how symmetrical Oda can get with the One Piece world? A great tree on the side of the world with a great tree on the opposite side of the world. Clues in Alabasta about a hidden weapon on the opposite side of the world in Wano. Clues in the sky about ancient weapons at the bottom of the sea. Now, while this is a cool design, it also plays into the narrative from time to time, such as the location of Laugh Tale, which we covered in this video. Loki is at the bottom of the Adam tree. He has a lot of ties to Shirahoshi and could possibly be the one he calls Moza. Shirahoshi is at the bottom of the Eve tree. At the top of the Eve tree was the Lunarians, the significance of which is highlighted in King's name Arbor, meaning a group of trees. At the top of Giant Jack were the Shandians and their sacred bell. At the top of the Adam tree, I think there's a Birken Emerald City, Asgard. Using symmetry we can find some pretty cool ties, such as the Great Tree's connections to ancient weapons. The Sunlight Tree, Eve, provides the ecosystem for Fishman Island, which is associated with the ancient weapon Poseidon. The Treasure Tree, Adam's Wood, known for its exceptional strength, is believed to have been used in construction the ancient ship Pluton. I just mentioned Uranus being at the top of the Adam tree, so the flip side of where the ancient weapon Poseidon resides. Earlier I mentioned Uranus may be involved in making these trees so big, so perhaps Poseidon is involved somehow too. So basically what I'm saying here is there are ties between the ancient weapons and certain trees. And it could be that these ancient weapons, not just Uranus but Poseidon also, and maybe even Pluton, were all engaged in somehow making these trees massive. Trees are also inherently connected to disease in One Piece. Tree fever, Kinetsu, is a deadly disease that affects people living in poor or remote areas with limited medical access. It is only briefly mentioned in the series, but it could tie into when Kappa said he had a sick friend living in the Alabastan village of Amaralu, which was suffering from doubt. Tree fever, as I mentioned, is called Kinetsu, which definitely almost is an anagram of Kestia, which is the name of the tick that gave Vivi the 5-day disease. Also, trees produce amber, which is found in the name Amber Lead Signet. A notable doctor in the story is Chopper, someone who has a name that ties to trees. Chopper's mentors were Kureha and Hiruluk, and Kureha lived in a tree. Hiruluk also lived in a tree and used a tree stump for a bed. All told, the reader can deduce that the sickness of the world is in part caused by Imu's treatment of the Eve tree. However, Chopper's ties to the mix give us hope that these diseases can be healed, thanks to the strong wills of those who make sacrifices for the cause, such as Hiruluk. These ties might actually go deeper, as I discussed a couple years ago in the Will of Tree video. Drum Island's rock formations resemble cut down trees, reflecting what we saw in Skypiea when Nolan stopped the spread of tree fever. The drum arc features the Sakura Kingdom, reminiscent of the tree atop the flower capital of Wano. And the drums are stated to be 15,000 feet tall, exactly half the height of the Sky Islands and the ground, potentially aligning with the Eve tree's height and the placement of Marijwa. When you consider the castle that's up there that looks like Marijwa, it kind of makes sense, right? So if these drums were trees, then why were they cut down? There's a creator called Straw Hat Lucas who believes that a giant Gear 5 Luffy will play the drums of liberation on them at some point, but if you have your own ideas, feel free to drop a comment below. During his journey, Joy Boy alongside the Kazuki and Minx would have discovered the truth about the Redline. He would have likely known the Redline is an artificial construct and that it was created by fusing islands from his home nation, the Ancient Kingdom, together. Joy Boy probably understood this fractured the world, dividing nations and restricting freedom. As such, it could be that his grand plan would be to include bringing down the Redline. This fits with the idea that the One Piece treasure may not be gold or power. It may be the means to reshape the world itself. Now, while I think it's unlikely Luffy's dream is to bring down the Redline specifically, Charlie's prophecy predicts Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, so whatever Joy Boy and Luffy's dream was or is, we can assume a byproduct of achieving this dream is the destruction of the Redline under Marie's Joie. The fact that Noah is introduced and arcs are usually associated with saving animals and people from floods foreshadows this. No doubt this coincides with Joy Boy's vague promise to one day have the sun shine on the fishermen again. Finally, we consider the bubbles at Sabaody, and the fact Fishman Island is actually in a bubble, so we could even go as far as to speculate Fishman Island will one day exist above sea level. Through the combined use of the ancient weapons along with some hacky techniques, I think the Redline could be brought down. Uranus is shown to have a relationship with trees on the Elbaf mural. Pluton is known for its destructive capabilities, and Poseidon has already been shown to guide the Noah via her control over Sea Kings. I've speculated the poneglyphs were carved using Rio, a technique native to Wano, which is where Luffy learned Rio can deal damage from the inside out, so perhaps the Eve Tree can be destroyed from outside of the Redline, making the Redline vulnerable. Rio is an anagram of Yoru. This could mean it was the blade that carved the poneglyphs. The mantle suggests that the blade itself has ties to Joy Boy. I've been saying for years it's probably Joy Boy's sword. All told, this might indicate that Yoru will also split the Redline. But for extra info on any of the points I've raised so far, you can check out older videos as we've talked about the individual elements for years. The point I'm making here though is that the Eve Tree is what makes the Redline indestructible. I theorize in order to bring the Redline down, the tree has to be killed or destroyed, which is of course a puzzle in itself considering its encasement in an indestructible Redline. This tells us that somehow, maybe from inside Marie's Joie or inside the Redline, damage has to be done to the Eve Tree, which will then allow the rest of the Redline to become vulnerable. By killing off Eve Tree's power, I predict the entire Redline will probably crumble into the sea, which leaves the world in a very dangerous situation with dramatic change in sea levels that will follow, foreshadowed already many times in the story. Incidentally, Noah's Ark was said to have weathered some intense storms, so maybe the Ark will offer some level of protection. In terms of additional information or findings, you could say there does appear to be ties with Tontata to trees, and there are a couple of smaller creators that have an interest in this. Desnes, the dwarf, is a pretty big Tontata expert. I think Hidden's got a theory called the Green Line, which might talk about Tontatas on there. I remember someone talking about that once. And he's a great theorist, so. And again, this would all come back to Lunarians and their connections to trees and them living on the Redline. Finally, I mentioned Gibbs, who you can find in our Discord server. He's been speculating the Adam and the Eve tree is perhaps one great tree, with Will of Fire talking about the roots going through the entire world, or perhaps even the entire Redline. So if you've got any ideas about roots inside the blue planet coming from these great trees, feel free to jump in the Discord, drop us a tag, and we'll talk about it. Alrighty then, with that I'm going to leave you with a question for you to answer below. What great trees will survive the One Piece story? I'll throw a poll up at some point in a community post in a week or so and we'll kind of tally your thoughts up. The Tree of Knowledge has burned down. The Adam tree looks like it's going to burn down. The Eve tree might be sick and need cutting down, like with Nolan and the Tree Fever. So yeah, there's a lot going on, lots to unpack with trees. But if you made it this far, you've just won a seat at the next Reverie and you will be representing your entire nation. So make sure you're subbed, touch base with your family, and toodle pip. In my last video, I talked in depth about how duality is depicted throughout the One Piece story and how that tells us about Imu and Joy Boy's backstory. However, there is one case of this in the story that is particularly interesting, which is Shanks and Shamrock. Why was Shanks the only baby put in a chest at God Valley? How is it one became a God's Knight and the other became a proponent of the Will of D? Or is there perhaps more to this situation? Garlin was shown to replace Saturn as the head of science. Other than that, the only information we have about him is that he's Shamrock's father. Presumably Shanks and Shamrock are twins, leading to the conclusion Garling is also Shanks' father. Whitebeard says to Shanks that Shanks' face makes Whitebeard's scar ache, and later in the story we see a young Garling at God Valley that looks identical to Shanks. Now, when we look at flashbacks of Whitebeard, it gives us a timeline that essentially confirms that Shanks Garling that gave Whitebeard the scar at God Valley, confirming Shanks and Garling are related. The introduction of Shamrock changes the content of some important scenes in the story, leading some to ask questions such as, was it Shanks or Shamrock that met with the Gorosei? Is this how Shanks fast travelled? And why would Oda introduce a character that looks identical to Shanks in the first place? There's even a chance that Shamrock is Bonnie's father, after an SBS revealed a striking resemblance between the two. Sup people of the internet, it's Den again, and rather deep dive, we're going to have a palate cleanser where we look at Shamrock and Shanks and whether or not they're the same person, whether or not they're on the same team, and we're going to look how Ragnar plus Shamrock might equal Ragnarok, and essentially just turn over as many stones as we have time for. So subscribe if you've got a pair, and let's get straight into this. Now, Shanks is clearly a strong character. Not only is he a current and past Yonko, but we also see him around some of the most significant characters in the One Piece world, from Roger himself to the Gorosei. His bounty is among the highest, his crew seems relatively small. Shanks doesn't have a devil fruit, as with many of his crew members, which is testament to their physical strength, later suggested to be inherited as a blood trait for Shanks when the reader sees that Garling was the champion of the God Valley incident. Of course, his twin being the captain of the God's Knights, implies that he is also very powerful. Shanks was said to stop Kaido from attending Marineford, prevented a full-scale war and he has access to Marijois, so he has political strength too. Through volume 4 billion, the supplemental manga, alongside film Red, we discover some key information regarding Shanks' haki and some details concerning his crew. In it, it's stated that Shanks has a seemingly unique ability to block or suppress Color of the Supreme King. Color of the Supreme King refers to Conqueror's haki, and is unique to a few characters in the One Piece world. This could mean that Shanks is immune to other types of haki also, for example being detected by observation haki. In contrast to this, we can presume Shanks is pretty much top tier observation haki. In volume 4 billion, we can find some of the capabilities of his crew, and even getting some comparisons, in addition to some Vivre card information. For example, Lucky Roo is said to be the quickest character in the world. He's the character that physically took the Gomu fruit off Who's Who's ship, and was featured from the very beginning of One Piece. Also, he can supposedly catch bullets because he is so agile. Yasop is a high-level marksman, with observation haki stated to best even katakuris. So there's a brief overview of the more essential members of Shanks' crew, but what does this mean? Well, for starters, Lucky Roo being the quickest in the world means Shanks can't be quicker. So then how can Shanks have the upper hand on Roo enough to be his captain? It tells us that Shanks has solid observation haki. And we have a similar situation with Ben Beckman, because Ben is quick enough to catch bullets, as I said, and can strike from range, the counter to which again would be observation haki. Lastly, observation haki would allow Shanks to be able to get out of the way of Yasop's sharpshooting, so it's implied Shanks likely has top tier observation, significantly higher than most. Okay, so while Shanks is a strong fighter, can likely go undetected, and can probably detect others quite easily, he has an identical twin brother and a dad who sits at the Gorosei. These elements make for an interesting possibility that there's more going on that meets the eye initially. The reader can see Oda has leaned into the idea that there's two versions of Shanks, for example with Loki, who was tied to the Adam Tree by Shanks, and then later Shamrock arrives and offers to release Loki from the Adam Tree. This will likely play out further. For example, we might see Shamrock lose a limb, similar to Shanks. Shanks sacrifices arm for Luffy, and it's not uncommon for characters to lose limbs, for example Neko, Inu, Kid, Kiros, Zeph, Aokiji and Croc, just to name a few.
It's a crazy world we live in. One with Jack Dougherty's and Spooderman. Jesus Christ, what is that thing? Everyone wants to be the next Island Boy or whatever. Get there first, punk. Wait, am I Batman or am I Wolverine? Oh, screw it. AI is the next sensation, and come on down and learn how. Heard you like discounts and coupons? Click the link below and you won't regret it. Tea! We love tea. Drink some! And I bet my tea drinking ass that in a few years, everyone will be using this beast of an idea. Fighting this is like fighting gravity, and who the hell does that? Use that perception hockey and see that we're right. Easy audio video upload, aspect ratios, style changing like Mega Man, you name it. Give yourself a custom avatar. Want subtitles? Take too many. The options are limitless, but damn.
I'm sorry.
Impress the homies? Filmora. Clubbing? Filmora. Stalk Taylor Swift? Can't help you. All jokes aside, here's some tips for budding creators. Step 1, drop that footage. Phone, PC, don't matter. Step 2, pick your poison and AI gets started with subtitles added. Step 3, flair. This is you customizing. Make it your own. It even comes with lip sync. Take advantage. After that, you can go to the full edit suite and min-max as much as you'd like and breathe life into your creation. Publish, and that's all, folks. Don't be the last one to get Filmora. John was the last one with Daenerys and he got banished. For reasons. Don't be John. Get Filmora and get creating. Now, without further ado, I place you back in the tiny hands of Din Din.
A reoccurring pattern in One Piece is Luffy destroying a signature feature of the enemies, such as Doflamingo's glasses, Crocodile's hook, and Kaido's horn. So it could be that Luffy maimed Shamrock's leg, Shamrock's opposite in contrast to Shanks' arm. This is perhaps also foreshadowed by Luffy being the captain of the Straw Hats and Shamrock being the captain of the Holy Knights. Okay, so if Luffy's role is to bring the dawn and Blackbeard's role is to bring the dusk, then what is Shanks' role in all this? And the same for Shamrock. When Imu withdrew Saturn's life, Imu explicitly stated that allowing Joy Boy to escape is unacceptable, so the world government's agenda is to capture Joy Boy, ergo presumably Shamrock would want to capture Joy Boy too. In contrast, we have Shanks, who appears to facilitate the coming of the new dawn, so in other words, he supports Joy Boy. The imagery we've seen in the story of the Figurlam family so far gives a distinct villainous vibe, with Garling relishing the death and destruction at God Valley, and Shamrock essentially torturing at Loki. Again, this is contrast by Shanks, who was shown to care for Luffy as a child, and potentially even have his own child with Makino. So again we see two different perspectives, likely defined by their upbringing, as is common in One Piece. So let's examine these childhoods deeper and see what we can learn. Of course, we have some ideas about Shanks' upbringing, since being 1 year old, he was put in a treasure chest at God Valley. From here, Roger brought him up as his protege, even passing down the all-important Straw Hat. Shanks remained on Roger's crew until his death, which Shanks witnessed at the execution stand amongst the crowds. So, in line with the core message of One Piece, Shanks was taken in by a surrogate father, taught diverse values through his travels on the sea, and eventually became a Yonko. The mystery instead comes with Shamrock. What happened to him during his childhood? Why was he not put in a chest at God Valley like Shanks? And how will he impact the story? This is where the fact they're twins tells us something key to their shared characters. Shamrock is clearly implied to have grown up under the wing of the world government. This is shown mainly by the fact that he is a God's Knight. Clearly, the world government holding him in high regard as the captain of the God's Knights shows Shamrock is trusted with the world government's ideals and agenda. This is in line with what we've seen in the story so far. For example, the children recruited by Carmel at Lamb's house can later be seen as agents as the world government. The most direct example is probably this young person, who is later seen at the God Valley incident, and appears to be the dragon-looking God's Knight revealed in Elbaf. Alongside Lucci, this determines how the hierarchy works. Being drafted at a young age, then entering Cypherpole, meaning you have to master the 6 paths, which is then followed by joining Cypherpole 0, which comes alongside an awakening, and finally we have the God's Knights, who Shamrock followed, who likely are blessed with the highest honour bestowed, which is extended life. I think it's likely Shamrock followed a similar path, which contrasts Shanks under Roger as a captain. One Piece readers are familiar with the term two sides of the same coin, something we see throughout One Piece, from more obvious examples such as Emo and Joy Boy, Blackbeard, Luffy, and also more subtle examples like the Mother Flame facilitating technological development and providing energy, but also featuring great destructive capabilities. We see deeper examples involve possession, or multiple people inside one person, such as Hakuba and Cavendish, and of course Blackbeard, which was highlighted in the infamous "them" quote. The motif of the two sides of the same coin is prevalent in One Piece, but if Oda's done this already so many times, why would we need to see another example with such an explicit Shanks lookalike? Why did Oda make them twins? I think it's because this will actually be a reversal of the two sides of the same coin motif. Rather than them being two opposite sides, what if they both represent the center? What if Shamrock and Shanks are actually on the same team, with their own special motivations aside from the world government and Joy Boy's agendas? Now, many long-term viewers know I've been talking about the kids at Big Mum's house for years and years and years, but we just had an absolute major lore drop that flips the entire idea on its head. Throughout our discussions about Lamb's house, we always used to say that Imu must have marked her subordinates, and Oda has actually now given us a physical manifestation of this, which he called the Mark of the Abyss. The Abyss refers to an ability used by certain members of the world government, which allows them to travel long distances and to summon others to their own location by using magic circles as a medium. The exact mechanism behind this, how this power functions, is as of yet unclear, but it is known that only those who have the necessary mark on them can travel through the Abyss. Those with marks cannot bring unmarked individuals with them. So in other words, if they want to kidnap somebody, they have to take them via traditional methods of travel, such as a ship, for example. It appears that marked individuals do not have to be aware of the imminent travel through the Abyss if summoned by another party, meaning that their transportation may occur without them even being prepared or even dressed. They could be in the shower, and from this we can make some interesting speculations, such as perhaps this is how the kids at Lamb's house were seen years after Big Mum supposedly ate them. We know something terrible happened because an unnamed giant witnessed the whole situation and fled in horror. If anyone has any ideas who this unnamed giant could be, then drop it in the comments, because I have no clue personally, but I will show a picture of him on the screen. Anywho, the point is the children may have already been marked, and so once they were eaten, they returned back to Marie-Joie. This to me makes sense after what we saw with the Gorosei returning to Marie-Joie after their defeat, and it could be a part of the deal with the 20 kingdoms that Imu made, which would be that they have to provide one or more of their children in the service of the world government. So then, what's the Mark of the Abyss got to do with Shanks and Shamrock? Well, if the children of the world government are marked, then does this mean Shanks and Shamrock were marked? Shamrock, we know, has been marked because he's been under the world government all his life, presumably, and we've seen him travel through these teleportation circles. Shanks is far less obvious because, as we saw, he was displaced at the age of 1, and we also saw he sacrificed his arm. This would allow Oda, if the whole arm thing was about the Mark of the Abyss, then it allows Oda to give some solid context for why Shanks gave up his arm the way he did, despite the fact it was suggested originally by Oda's editor. Either way, presumably Shanks does not have the Mark of the Abyss, which may give Shanks more agency than Shamrock, something that could play a crucial role in Shanks and Shamrock's agenda. As a quick aside, this could lead to questions surrounding Garling and whether or not he lied to Imu about how many children he had in the first place, hiding Shanks in the hopes one would be free of the world government service, but I digress. Now, this is where the fact that Oda made them twins relevant. What is a super common trope that we see used with twins in media? If you're as old as me or Kureha, then you can think about a movie such as Parent Trap, which is where the twins switch places. This concept actually originated far earlier than Shamrock's reveal, and even led to a question during an interview whereby someone asked if Shanks was actually two people. Oda replied that Shanks' scar is sometimes incorrect, which could allude to the mystery being true, but adds that he sometimes forgets to draw scars. Now, I personally think this is a tongue-in-cheek nod to the fact that Garp is known to have a moving scar on over 20 occasions, to which Oda elaborates in an SBS joking it might be his alter ego, and many speculate that Blackbeard has multiple personalities. Loki wanted to marry Lola, who was a twin, and the twins were switched full Loki. So there's plenty of evidence to suggest there could be some switching places going on between Shanks and Shamrock. Highlight Shanks' family resemblance, saying his face makes his scar hurt. This tells us either that Shanks is giga ugly, or that it was Garling, Shanks' father, who scarred Whitebeard, as we discussed earlier. The ability to be two places in once is far more likely if Shanks and Shamrock are working together, which could provide an explanation for how Shanks seems to try. Now, I can imagine some are instantly thinking, no way, people would realise Shanks has one arm, etc, etc, but interestingly, it just so happens that Oda does make a point of people being super gullible to disguises. Luffy was in disguise in Dressrosa, followed by Sabo. The Straw Hats were imitated by Damaro Black and his gang, and later on pretended to be Eustace Kid. Sogeking and Usopp, well, say no more. There are tons of other examples where a simple disguise fools people in One Piece, so it's not a reach to think that Shanks could throw on a prop arm or something along them lines while infiltrating Marie-Joie. Or, in other words, I don't think Oda's going to see it as much as a obstruction to Shanks doing what he wants, pretending to be Shamrock, for example, which might have happened in Marijois, for example. If the two were working as one, it would explain how Shamrock would have known about Loki being tied to the Adam Tree, seeing as it was Shanks that put him there, and Loki says same face, repeating the notion that Shanks' face is important. Shanks may have been tipped off by Shamrock about who was escorting the Gomu, which facilitated its theft. So one option is Shanks and Shamrock are working together. However, I think there might be another option, or at least another part of this, which is even more likely. For years, many of us theorized that Xebec was Shanks' father, which was boosted when readers discovered Shanks was found at God Valley. Since then, it's implied Garling is Shanks' father, as he is the twin of Garling's confirmed son. However, there may still be some crossover here. Xebec died at God Valley under mysterious circumstances, and in the same year, Hiruluk discovered a special cure for a sickness of the heart. Subsequently, Hiruluk sacrifices himself, instilling a strong will in his surrogate son, Chopper. I've talked about this in previous videos, but this tells us that at God Valley, Xebec sacrificed himself for some reason, and it seemed to have inspired Hiruluk after presumably witnessing it. So this could mean that Garling experienced something similar at the God Valley incident, after witnessing Xebec's sacrifice motivating him to hide his son from the world government. Why would Garling hide Shanks and not Shamrock? As crazy as it sounds, it could be that Garling wanted Shanks to be taken by pirates, or maybe even Roger specifically. This would leave Garling with two sons, one under the rule of the world government climbing the ranks, and one under the most famous pirate in the world. 38 years ago, Roger takes Shanks by accident. 28 years ago, so 10 years later, Roger discovers he has a terminal illness. So did Shanks poison Roger on behalf of Garling? After all, Garling replaced Saturn as the head of science, so has ties to poison, and it may have been Shamrock that Ginny married. At God Valley, Garling was shown to kill a king, illustrated by the crown in the panel, and of course Roger was the king of the pirates. We see a panel where young Shanks hears Roger coughing and reacts frightened and asks if he's okay, perhaps hinting at some deeper concern from Shanks. Young Orochi was manipulated into Sukiyaki's father, ultimately killing him, and Dofi shot his father at 10 years old, strongly implying this could be which is the same age Shanks was when Roger found out he was terminally ill. Context as to why Shanks was sobbing, regretting his decision, as we saw with Whitebeard and the whole traitor scene in Marineford. Perhaps this marked a turning point in Shanks' allegiance to his father and twin brother, deciding instead to secure Roger's will. I just want to point out, off the script at this point, that is such a huge thing. If Roger's sacrifice, if Shanks was destined to kill Roger as a child, but Roger's sacrifice then liberated this child from that service and from the world government service or from Garling's service, and instead then Shanks makes his own choices, then that would completely embody the whole message that Oda's going for with One Piece. And of course Shanks and Roger are so central, so to have that directly, obviously Shanks inspired the whole pirate world, but to have it so directly inspired into a child would just be chef's kiss, in my opinion. This turn in agendas is also seen with Dragon as well, who told us that at some point he worked under the Marines, and now of course he's the head of the Revolutionary Army. If Roger did in fact know that Shanks was under the influence of Garling, then it would make sense why he would not allow him to have gone on to Laugh-Tale. But there is something way spicier with that. Remember, Shanks gave Barto to Luffy. Not only might this be foreshadowing for what we're talking about here, but Barto drank it and was absolutely fine. At the time, we speculated in a video that the potion may have something to do with Laugh-Tale, and if Luffy would have been the one to drink it and then go to Laugh-Tale, then he would have succumbed to a terminal illness. So why do I bring up that Barto drank it? Well, because this could imply that Shanks couldn't go to Laugh-Tale because he had handled the poison, and Roger knew this, leading him to ensure Shanks stayed behind. Evidence for this is seen in Shanks' closest companion, who at the time was Buggy, who did get sick, so maybe Buggy had been contaminated by Shanks playing around with this poison. The narrator asks, are they best friends or are they mortal enemies? Adding to the idea, and even uses the word mortal referring to death, aka terminal. Roger was shown to cough up blood, and it's at that same time Buggy gets sick, so this doesn't look too good. And also, as a quick aside, this could be evidence that if this is the case, Shanks has some sort of immunity to poison, which fits the whole Garling being the head of science and his father, right? Maybe like Shanks is part experiment or clone, as some people speculate. Now jump forward a few years, Shanks makes a bet sacrificing his arm, which is not only him saving Luffy's life, but potentially, as I mentioned, him sacrificing his own mark of the abyss, symbolically severing any ties with his father's agenda. So Shanks has gone over to the other team, let's say, leaving Shamrock under the world government, or at least as far as it would appear. Oda stated that the red hair pirates will be fighting alongside an unlikely ally. So does this in Elbaf? So does this mean Shamrock might also come over to the good side, or perhaps he's already working alongside Shanks in a secret fashion? Now Shamrock clearly has a role to play in Elbaf. Loki's weapon was revealed to be Ragnir, which brings down lightning. Shanks' blade sets on fire, both of which are the weaknesses for the Adam Tree. If Shamrock has a similar fiery sword, then Ragnir and Shamrock might give us Ragnarok. This is more likely than Luffy's fiery red rock against Loki's Ragnir, in my opinion, but perhaps they all three strike each other to make Ragnarok. After all, we don't know how Luffy will be able to tell the difference between Shanks and Luffy and Shamrock, and while he detected Shanks via his haki before, Luffy can be gullible and could initially presume Shanks has grown back his arm, or some dumb ish like that, right? An important characteristic that tells us a little bit more about Shamrock is while Garling is called Saint Garling, Saint Figurlin Garling, Shamrock is just Figurlin Shamrock. Now other Holy Knights are named saints, so this is unusual, and it isn't likely just down to the fact that he's the captain of the Holy Knights. Garling is a saint, so it can't be the fact he's a Figurlin. Garling is a saint. As we said, Garling is a saint, so it can't be the fact that Shamrock is a Figurlin. So the key here is most likely the mother. Shanks and Shamrock probably are not legitimate full-blooded celestial dragons, but instead half D-clan and half celestial. This is highlighted by Oda via the red shades of hair throughout the story as a big indicator. The fact that Oda often highlights Shanks' red hair throughout the story is a big indicator that this is a clue as to who the mother would be. Further evidence is that Shanks is not actually his name, so Shanks' birth name may play a role in revealing his mother's identity also. Now, I know it would be super nice if we could all go on and discover who Shanks' mother is and how she plays a key role in everything, but my personal feelings are that she is yet to be revealed. I think that's because she plays a bigger role in other characters. For example, what if she's the mother of another important character as well as Shanks and Shamrock? Just hypothetically, for example, Luffy, making them brothers, or perhaps Kid is that sibling, finally giving us context on Kid's obsession with Shanks. Okay, anyway, that's all we've got time for in this vid, but hopefully this had stirred some thoughts and curiosities within the noggin, in which case write some of them in the comments and let me know. Any feedback is good, so holler at your favourite snail and we'll keep improving. If you made it this far, you've just won some rainbow stones. So let me know in the comments where you want them delivered and I'll plop and drop them to your doorstep. Now, I gotta go feed my Sarlacc, so you stay classy, San Diego. We all know the One Piece is the ultimate goal of many pirates on the Grand Line, but what exactly is it? While Oda confirmed there will indeed be physical treasure at Laugh Tale, of course, the One Piece will also hold significant symbolic value, and will likely change the world once it's discovered. For sure, the final island will be multifaceted, with a few different elements that make it up, but the centerpiece has to be the One Piece treasure. Now, there are already a ton of ideas of what the One Piece could be, but there is actually one I heard about a couple of years ago that stands out more and more as time goes on. Putting it together with some other ideas we've had about Laugh Tale, we can actually take a pretty solid guess at something specific the One Piece treasure might be. You may have seen a user commenting in a few different live streams over the years by the name Sozo. This user contacted me a few years back after he heard I'd been digging deep into what we both think is the most important and underrated symbol in the entire series. In fact, at the time he even had it as his profile picture. Anywho, Sozo asked me to make a video based on an idea he had about what the One Piece is, and so I looked into it. I pretty quickly noticed some interesting connections, and some strange panels that certainly stood out as intentional from Oda, but I couldn't wrap my single brain cell around how it would be relevant. A couple of years later and I might actually be sold on the idea, so without further ado, I'm Den Kushi, and this is what the One Piece is. To predict what the One Piece treasure is, we need to understand its nature. We know the One Piece stands as the greatest mystery in the story as it acts as the title. Left by Goldie Roger, the former Pirate King, this treasure is said to reside on Laugh-Tale, the final island of the Grand Line and the end of the New World, both literally and metaphorically. Reaching Laugh-Tale makes a person the Pirate King, aka the freest person in the world. However, this does not automatically grant access to whatever was left there from the Void Century. We know this because Roger arrived too early to be able to completely fulfill Joy Boy's will. This tells us that there are certain conditions that need to be met in order for the One Piece to truly reveal itself, such as being there at the right time. We can speculate what these conditions are, but for now let's focus on the actual One Piece treasure. So the One Piece is a pirate treasure left by the previous Pirate King. Interestingly, Luffy, the future Pirate King, outright tells us what his personal treasure is, which is his straw hat. The straw hat symbolizes a bond between the old era and the new era. Luffy puts his straw hat on Nami, telling us that the bonds with his nakama are also Luffy's treasure. So if the One Piece is tied to Luffy, as it is Joy Boy, then it's likely something that connects to bonds. Arta's MegaTheory predicted the One Piece would be Sake Cups, echoing the idea that bonds play a key role at Laugh-Tale. In One Piece we are told bonds are strengthened through emotions, which comes from humanity, a key aspect of Oda's message. Throughout the story, Oda connects humanity to their heart, giving us our first proper clue what the One Piece might be. It's something like a heart, something that represents all the elements important to the story. After all, One Piece was originally named Romance Dawn, and romance is an aspect associated with the heart. Luffy says, "Power isn't decided by your size, but by the size of your heart and dreams." Zoro tells us that being removed from your heart is what takes you to hell in the quote, "I've had this feeling before. Everything around me was eerily silent. My heartbeat was like distant thunder. It was like standing at the gates of Hades." So, perhaps the One Piece is someone's heart that's been removed. Tashigi and Smoker have their hearts switched in chapter 661, and Tashigi is asked, "Are you sure you'll be okay without a heart?" To which she replies, "Yes, strangely enough." In the same chapter, the Straw Hats have their hearts switched around, causing the crewmates that are affected to switch personalities. The devil fruit that causes this is heart-shaped. The person with this switch ability is also the captain of the Heart Pirates, and has a large heart tattoo on his chest. The person who connects this ability to the treasure of Maria Joie is Doflamingo, who sits on the heart seat. His brother wears a heart-covered shirt and is called Corazon, which means heart. We see something similar again when Law has his heart stolen and kept in a box by Caesar. Caesar drops some super foreshadowing when he says, "Give your heart to me, then our deal will be sealed." So there's more imagery suggesting some removal of a heart, but why would a human heart be important to the narrative of One Piece? We see hearts tied to suns and smiles through the Heart Pirate's Jolly Roger. Frankie wears a shirt saying Hito. The sun sits right on top of Frankie's heart, again hinting at some connection between the sun god and hearts. Oda explicitly showed both God Enel and Luffy's hearts to restart. Now, I've speculated before that the voice of all things is created by the heartbeats of all living things. This could be the infinite and accessible fuel source Vegapunk was alluding to, aligning with sun imagery, and its role as a fuel source. So a specific heart rhythm might create or activate some sort of fuel source in the One Piece world. We can assume this is the drums of liberation. We see the drums played in Wano at the same time Luffy's heartbeat restarts, suggesting the two are connected. Luffy is not the only character whose heart is tied to drums. Appu was shown in an SBS to have a drum for a heart. So it does seem possible hearts give off a drum beat, and a particular drum beat, aka the drums of liberation, has some powerful effects within the One Piece world. We see clues to the significance of hearts scattered across the blue planet. Lovesickness is a prominent disease in the story which ties to the heart. Hiriluk also has a sickness of the heart. Crocus said that Laboon is a whale with a human heart. This is told to the reader right next to Reverse Mountain, which is where I think the One Piece is located. Blackbeard seems to have done something to Whitebeard in Marineford, potentially involving his heart. something physical surely did happen, which is why Oda had Blackbeard cover the whole process from the reader behind a sheet. Hearts are relevant to pirates externally also. For example, with Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, who kept his heart in a chest. Finally, the human heart is made of 4 chambers which process blue blood and red blood. This is reminiscent of the poneglyphs, with there being 4 road poneglyphs which are red and the rest which are blue. To further develop the idea, we take a look at another popular thread. This thread has been talked about for years, most commonly referred to as X marks the spot. Oda even included the X in the anime closing screen at the end of every episode. The idea is usually associated with Reverse Mountain being the location of Laugh Tale. So the cross is tied to Laugh Tale, and Laugh Tale is home to the One Piece, which we speculate is a heart. The most important, yet perhaps least known example of one of these X marks is on page 1, with the Pirate King and father of the current One Piece treasure. If we look at panel 2, we see that Roger has 2 blades crossed just below his chin. However, if we go back and look at panel 1, this is not what we see. Instead, Oda has the blades crossing off-center to the right. This is clearly the position where Roger's heart would be. So in panel 1 of the entire story, we are being shown what the One Piece is to some degree. In the current timeline, Vivi is given the cross symbol to symbolize her bond with the Straw Hats. This same X mark is seen in the same place on Emeth's arm, indicating Joy Boy also has ties to this symbol. So we see that the X is not only connected to Laugh Tale, but to hearts. Now, Luffy has an X across his chest. Pirates keep their treasure in a chest. The treasure that's in Luffy's chest is his heart. As a quick aside, this is contrasted by Kobe, who has a cross on his forehead. So, in other words, these guys will change hearts and minds. So, is the One Piece a heart? Well, not in the way we picture a heart. Why? It's because what happens if you take someone's heart and leave it in a box for 800 years? It would deteriorate and turn to dust, as we see with Brook. Just like Imu being preserved for so many centuries must require an additional element, something unnatural. Furthermore, Blackbeard's dream tells us that the One Piece is capable of destruction, so there must be more going on than a simple human heart. So far, the story has told us the world government spends a lot of time developing dark powers through advanced technology. A product of this method is shown, though, Luffy and other children growing up around scrap, junk or trash, symbolizing the repercussions of such development, and hinting that children are also thrown away in a similar manner under the world government's system. This special technology is shown through York to derive from greed in order to achieve unnatural feats. For example, giants are suggested to grow giant because of their free nature, whereas Caesar was trying to make children giants using experimentation and technology. If this way of doing things was inherited by Imu from the Ancient Kingdom, then it tells us that the Ancient Kingdom likely achieved an unnatural way of creating the drums of liberation, the voice of all things and all the other heart-related powers we see, such as Luffy's transformation to Gear 5. So the One Piece could actually be a mechanical heart. Luffy's fascination with mechs kinda leans into this idea, suggesting Luffy will find the One Piece really cool, despite not comprehending its true power. In conclusion, the heart plays a key role in the story. Doflamingo might have specifically been referring to Emu's heart in relation to Law's switching ability. A sickness of the heart might have been what killed Roger. Either way, I'm pretty confident that the One Piece is some sort of mechanical engine that emulates Nika, Joy Boy and Luffy's heartbeat. If so, this would work like an engine, which fits with Luffy's gears and matches perfectly with multiple quotes in the series telling Luffy fuels others to liberate and free themselves. Gear 2 puts stress on Luffy's heart because his heart pumps blood more intensely. In this gear, Luffy creates steam, akin to steam engine, and the gear shortens his lifespan. If that is the case, then perhaps Emu used this specifically to control Zunesha, as we know the giant elephant is drawn to the drum rhythm. Alternatively, it could be that Emu has never had true access to this power, which would explain the world government's interest in creating the Mother Flame. Ultimately, Oda's deliberate selection of the heart as the treasures is mirrored by Luffy following his heart, which we see through his indifference towards navigation. This is Oda communicating a universal message of peace and love in an era characterized by conflicts and trauma. The One Piece world has a sickness, and it's through the heart that finds a cure, just like Hiruluk showed us. Oda emphasizes the need to restore faith in humanity through acts of compassion and genuine affection. By embracing love and nurturing good hearts, we can mend the fractures of society and foster a harmonious coexistence. Okay, so that's an overview of what the One Piece treasure is, but now let's speculate a little as to what might actually happen. Eventually, the Straw Hats will land on Laugh Tale. They'll discover that Joy Boy, who, like Luffy, couldn't swim, got washed up and stranded on the island of Laugh Tale with no way of getting off. It may be the case that he was saved by a whale and left on Laugh Tale as a result, beginning his relationship with the island whales. We can deduce that there's some account of Joy Boy's journey on Laugh Tale, but we are told paper doesn't last centuries, which is the reason we are told the poneglyphs were made. Instead, during his time stranded, he probably drew murals on the walls depicting his adventures. The drawings will probably look really bad, like how Luffy draws, which would explain why Roger and his crew were all laughing. There's a possibility that Joy Boy's body, or more accurately his skeleton, will be on Laugh Tale, acting as kind of proof to the reader that Joy Boy definitely was the one that drew the murals. However, this is as far as Roger and his crew likely made it. The Straw Hats, on the other hand, will be able to proceed into the heart of the ancient kingdom, where they will see a throne. The One Piece treasure will interact with this throne, sitting at the center of the city on Laugh Tale. This is why the reader sees Roger reacting to Laugh Tale at the same time Imu was introduced, where Imu sat on the empty throne. The throne acts as a lock, and the rightful heir to the ancient kingdom, Luffy, is the key. By sitting on the throne, Luffy inadvertently activated a power that can turn imagination into reality. In other words, the ancient kingdom is a city that artificially grants dreams using a mechanical heart that produces the drums of liberation. Once revealed, the city will activate, opening up and exposing the throne to the sun, which in turn ignites the eternal flame. This is the most powerful fuel source and is fueled by the heartbeat of the mech heart, meaning the ancient kingdom was powered by the voice of all things in a sense. This is the abundant fuel source Vegapunk was referring to. This in turn activates the machinery within the city. Furthermore, it will likely reanimate a ton of giant mechs like Emeth that are at the bottom of the ocean, which will come up and join the final war. This is why Oda showed us Emeth coming out of the sea before. In the same vein, the revival of the ancient city will power up the ancient weapons too. As such, the One Piece will have the power to destroy the Redline from within. That said, Luffy will destroy the throne before leaving Laugh Tale, preventing it from being used again in the future, opting not to destroy the Redline there and then because it would destroy Fishman Island. Instead, the Straw Hats resolve themselves to bring down the Redline their own way, with the help of their allies. Anywho, hope you enjoyed what we've been cooking today. Check out our sleep series if you want some second monitor content, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like and sub. If you made it this far, you've just won Doflamingo's jacket, so let me know where you want that delivered in the comments, and we'll get that dropped soon. Be nice to people, water your plants, and I'll see you on the next one. What did Rayleigh really mean when he told the Straw Hats they'd have to decide for themselves what to do about the true history? And why didn't the Roger Pirates tell the world what they found? What if the key to unlocking Imu's backstory is a perspective we've never considered? And what if it's Imu that's actually the ultimate victim of the One Piece true history? Today we're bringing you not just a mega theory, but our greatest video yet, packed with details that questions what we know about the ancient kingdom. We'll also be diving into side theories and giving a fresh perspective on some older scenes to point out details Oda has hidden, such as Stelly noticing Morley in the Red Line over 100 chapters prior to its reveal. My name's Denden Kushi, support free content by subscribing, and feel free to listen in the background while you're gaming or whatever, we won't be offended. By analysing quotes, the reader gets a sense that Imu suffered tremendously, likely under the subjugation and experimentation of the ancient kingdom's greed for advanced technology. The mixture of nature and nurture caused Imu to make all the wrong choices, such as isolating themselves from the world government and segregating others. This mainly took place over the Void Century, resulting in the current era, whereby children suffer and dreams become nightmares. This was manifested physically in the Elbaf arc. This suffering will only stop once Imu is defeated, and Joy Boy's successor fulfills the will of D, bringing about the new era, curing the disease of the heart, but on a global scale. In contrast to Imu, we have a ton of heroes. In the story, being human is an aspect of being a hero. An example of this is Nakama, demonstrated in Luffy's fight with Lucci, when Luffy says, "It's better than doing nothing while my friends get taken away," in chapter 420. Some important characters have an equivalent to Nakama but are villains, such as the Gorosei. So what makes a hero and what makes a villain according to Eiichiro Oda, and who will be the true hero by the end of the story? By answering these questions, we can deduce Joy Boy and Imu's motives, backstories, and how their journeys conclude. One Piece is a multi-dimensional story built up of many different themes and styles. The story is known for its comedy, for example, a favourite of mine being this all-time banger with Crocus. Don't, or someone will die. Oh, and who would that be? Well, me. But aside from the funny stuff, One Piece has some hard-hitting deep lines, like Robin's famous "I want to live" moment. Oda unveils deep subplots, lore, and mysteries through its dialogue, whether it's super explicit like how devil fruits are made, or super subtle like shipping Frankie and Robin. Important characters such as Luffy tell the reader what it means to unravel these mysteries and become a hero. The significance of the meaning of being a hero is particularly focused on in Elbaf, as perceptions become more and more central to the arc. So, for example, did Loki kill Harold for the fruit, or didn't he? Or was there more to it? Now, since One Piece is a manga, it relies on a mixture of dialogue and images to convey the messages Oda's communicating to the reader. There's also some supplemental material like the Vivre cards and SBS installments that give us vital character information, like the fact Luffy's penis is made of rubber, Buggy's penis can detach from his body, Hody Jones has 2 penises, Jinbei has 2, and Apu has a triangle for balls. Oda also teases us with clues that are later given context, such as Vivi seeing Karasu's crows before Karasu actually reached the reverie. By diving deeper into these clues, we can uncover all sorts, as I mentioned, from the location of Laugh-Tale to how Luffy created a fishman from a drawing. A good example of one of these quotes is when Luffy says, "If you don't take risks, you can't create the future." This echoes Shanks' bet on the future, or in other words, Luffy being the dawn of a new era. This bet is embodied by the iconic straw hat, which incidentally is circled by a red line. Whitebeard asks Shanks, "What enemy did you give your left arm to?" And Shanks replies, "This, I gave it up for a new era." Similar sentiments are shared by Roger, Joy Boy, and Pedro, among others, so we can see here that Oda is highlighting how some characters are tied to new eras. Vegapunk confirms this in his speech, saying, "The future is in your hands, and you have the power to change it. Do not falter, do not lose hope. The dawn of a new era is upon us, and you are its heralds." Sacrifices like Shanks' arm are required to progress the current era and change the world, which Vegapunk also confirms in his speech. Shanks says, "By experiencing both victory and defeat, running away and shedding tears, a man will become a man. It's okay to cry, but you have to move on." Although Shanks only lost a limb, Roger sacrificed his life to ignite a great search for the One Piece treasure, alongside many other characters in the story that have given their lives for the cause. Interestingly, Doflamingo said the weak don't get to choose how they die, so perhaps being able to choose how you die means you're powerful enough to change the era in the One Piece world. Smoker tells us in 483, a man's worth isn't determined by how he lives, but rather how he dies, which adds to this idea. During Wano, Kaido says death completes a man. Now Joy Boy died, but Imu didn't, so does this mean that Joy Boy is complete, and Imu isn't complete? However, Brooks says, what kind of fool plans to die, telling us that there's more to sacrifice than simply dying. Giola reinforces this, saying life is the most beautiful art, so being alive is important. Oda shows there are smaller, albeit abstract, sacrifices as well, which gives us a broader idea of what's considered true heroic strength. When Usopp says, "There comes a time when a man must stand and fight. The time is when his friends, dreams, and honor are all laughed at." In chapter 331, it demonstrates how being determined sometimes means being laughed at or ridiculed, mirrored in his counterpart 400 years ago, Noland, who held the conviction that the Golden City was real, even when it resulted in his death. Nolan's name went down in infamy as a liar, so the sacrifice in this case was Nolan's reputation, matching Usopp's quote. We see this embodied by Katakuri too, who is usually too shy to show his face, yet says, "If you want to laugh at that fool, then laugh at me too," prioritizing his values over ridicule. The conviction to laugh in the face of death may turn out to play a role in Nika's infamous laughing nature. Anywho, the pattern of sacrifice and change has been through at least 3 cycles or eras in the One Piece world, foreshadowed by Robin's quote in chapter 395, History is like an endless waltz. The three beasts of war, peace, and revolution continue on forever, and later confirmed through the Elbathian Haley myth, a historical text made up of three eras. In One Piece, the ability to make sacrifices that change the era comes from having a strong will, specifically aspects of will such as ambition and conviction. "As long as I'm alive, anything is possible" is a One Piece quote that underscores Joy Boy's message to the future, as well as Oda's message to the reader. This message is that with enough will, anyone can achieve their dream. Roger says, "Bear conviction under your flag," highlighting the fierce resolve that got him to Laugh Tale. Luffy is the epitome of conviction, such as when he says, "If I die fighting for it, that's fine, I will fight." This demonstrates the ambition of the Monkey Clan and their relentless pursuit for freedom, hinted at when Sengoku tells Garp, "Garp, it's your damn family again." This tells us that conviction is not a choice for Monkey D. Luffy, but his family's nature and his spirit. Whitebeard reiterated this when he said, "You're nothing but a mass of spirit. You can't help but talk big." Luffy's counterpart Blackbeard conveys the same, saying, "Let the heavens deal with life and death, even the most fearful lose to that. Let's live for another moment," mirroring this devil-may-care attitude and strong will. The line, "I prefer death over defeat," shows the extent of this type of conviction in One Piece, which sometimes borders on supernatural, best conveyed by Zoro, who says, "It takes a real man to die and then come back from the dead without dying," which, considering his nothing happened moment and the whole Grim Reaper scene, it seems like this could actually be possible. Zoro's mentor and idol is Mihawk, and Mihawk has the line, "What do you know about death? Have you ever died?" again suggesting some supernatural life after death. Conviction and ambition are not just aspects of humanity, but also freedom through making your own choices. In chapter 744, Sabo says it's not some kind of fate that decides our lives, it's us, explicitly stating that people can change the course of destiny, ergo free will. The heroes with a super strong will in the story are contrasted by villains, such as Crocodile, who says, "What good are your happy ideals if you can't do anything to make them a reality?" This quote hints that limiting your dreams limits your own potential, or in other words, without a big dream, you cannot change the era. Luffy doesn't care about fate either, and instead expresses his freedom, such as through his promises to help Nakama, an aspect that is super important to every single Straw Hat, which is actually a big reason why each Straw Hat joins the crew in the first place. Frankie confirms this in his post-Enies lobby speech, for example, when he says during 423, "Not one of them hesitates to take on the world for the sake of their comrades." Pretty much the whole arc was dedicated to the theme of Nakama, by Robin in particular. Robin in the same chapter says, "I have nothing to be afraid of now because I'm not alone." As we all know, the whole Enies lobby situation ended with a Buster Call as well. Now, when Luffy commits to liberating Wano, irrelevant of the global repercussions, he says, "I'm from overseas. What's wrong with that? A stranger's not allowed to save this country? I made a promise to my friend Tama, who gave me food, that I'll make this country a place where she can eat as much as she wants. If I can't fulfill that promise, this country will be an eternal hell," illustrating how Luffy has pretty much zero care or respect for any form of politics and instead acts under his own conviction, his own freedom. This massively undermines the world government's control. Other Joy Boy figures show the same conviction and disregard for social norms, such as Fisher Tiger, who scaled the Redline and released the slaves in Marijois. In episode 1026, Odin said, "When you're trying to protect something, it takes a lot of determination to live without compromising your belief. No matter how much time goes by, stick to what you believe in and don't let it go." The Revolutionary Dragon himself says it's important to live without regrets, echoed by Ace in the quote, "Live life without regrets." Zeph says, even if armed with hundreds of weapons, there are times where you just can't beat a man with the spear of conviction in his gut. There's similar statements in Skypiea. For example, "Let me tell you one thing I am certain of. No one has ever proved that El Dorado or Skypiea doesn't exist. People may laugh and say they're silly legends. Well, let them laugh. That's what makes it a great adventure." So that's Oda showing how some characters are indifferent to people's doubts and instead just carry on seeking the truth. The motivations behind such conviction also come from other human aspects, such as emotion. We see this conveyed with love, for example. Boa is repeatedly associated with hearts, her Devil Fruits design, her chapter 798 cover appearance, and her ability to petrify victims through love. Gloriosa noted, "In the East, they say love is like a hurricane, a phrase first used by Sanji in the East Blue." Boa's main theme song is Hurricane My Love. It could even be that love is the key to one of the deepest aspects of the true history. What I mean by this is Imu, Joy Boy and Lily were likely in a love triangle. As with Loki and Lola, it's possible Imu loved Lily romantically. Additionally, they were perhaps arranged to marry, indicated by the relentless depiction of wedding cakes, such as in the chapter 420 cover, where Sanji makes a wedding cake while a baboon is caged up watching on, but the cake has been infiltrated by some mice. So this likely depicts Joy Boy as a captive while Imu was marrying Lily, and there was something within the cake, suggesting there's like some nefarious plan going on behind the scenes. We saw the idea of wives at Marie Joie in the Egghead arc via Ginny. Through Joy Boy's influence, Lily likely found the courage to not marry Imu, but instead marry someone for love, again foreshadowed by Lola, who after several proposals eventually marries Gotti. However, there seems to have been some severe consequences through lovesickness, which I covered in an older video. In the video I talk about Green Bull's tattoo and Luffy's mum as well, so check that out for more. Frankie tells us in chapter 437 directly that love is important to power in the quote, "Your punches are missing something important. Love." And of course we've seen the whole love punch and love kick thing, which were also particularly powerful. That said, one of the more mysterious elements of humanity and freedom in the story is imagination, particularly since 1044, where Luffy was revealed to have the sun god Nika fruit, rooted in imagination. Usopp uses his imagination to lie when he's scared. It comes true, and then people call him a god. Buggy uses his imagination when he's scared by bluffing, highlighted by his island being called Empty Bluffs Island. However, these bluffs always come true, and he's also called a god. Bonnie believed in Sun God Nika, and she can seemingly use her imagination to distort her physique, with Luffy encouraging her to keep doing it. Every one of these aspects is a way in which Oda conveys what he believes it truly means to be human. A king is not the one who's the strongest, it's the one who can carry on the will of others, is a quote in chapter 970 by Odin, which tells us that what's inside is what's important. The same sense of conviction, imagination, and general humanity is in every human in the One Piece world, confirmed by Bonclay stating, "One may stray from the path of a man, one may stray from the path of a woman, but there is no straying from the path of a human." Beige adds to the idea that anyone can have the conviction to change the world when he says to Katakuri, "Everyone has an equal right to change the future." The mysterious quote by Willie Gallen that says, "Anything that humans can imagine is a possibility in reality," also adds to this, particularly alongside the SBS entry where Oda said people could once fly until people stopped believing. There are other more abstract aspects to humanity that Oda touches on also, such as with devil fruits. Vegapunk theorized that devil fruits are born from the desires of humans. So, in other words, if a person is in great distress, they wish for a savior, then a devil fruit grows with the power of the savior. I covered in my last video how there's ties between, for example, the Hito nomes, which seem particularly important, but they have the name Hito in, so which is human, and then they're devil fruits, which is devil, of course. So it's like a contrast between man and devil, or man and god. York was the greed aspect of Vegapunk, and she aligned herself with the world government, so alongside other examples, such as Kid in chapter 594, when he says, "Compared to the righteous greed of the rulers, the criminals of the world seem much more honourable." Greed comes from desire, and so is a negative aspect of humanity, leading to serious problems like the strike on the Leisure Kingdom. From this, we can speculate that the ancient kingdom may have desired devil fruits to improve their quality of life, only for them to become greedy and desire unnecessary powers, hinted at by the jacket fruit. So in other words, if you grow up in a society that's really, really poor and has no heat, then you might wish for fire, but if you are a child that grows up in a really lavish environment, you might be wasteful with your wishes. For example, wishing for a jacket or some piece of clothing. Another aspect tied closely to devil fruits is fear, as it seems to interrupt some devil fruit abilities. A decent example is Big Mum's soul fruit abilities. They only work on people that fear her. We see a twist on this with Sugar's devil fruit, which turns off when she's scared. Enel confirms the power of emotion through fear when he says, "It is not death that causes people to fear God. Fear is God." "Fear of death is worse than death itself" is a quote from Luffy that also highlights this in chapter 100. So again, Oda demonstrates that there are negative aspects to humanity too. Finally, death plays an integral role in the aspect of the story, confirmed when we learn that devil fruits reincarnate after someone's death. Luffy has the ability to bring out aspects of other people's humanity, such as Robin when she shouts, "I want to live," and more directly in Egghead, where, as I mentioned, Luffy encouraged Bonnie to go into Nika form. This shows that not only does Luffy have the power of strong conviction, but also the power to give others strong conviction. Such conviction is demonstrated by Frankie in the quote from chapter 425, which says, "You can kill them, but they won't die," referring to his Galila Nakama. This trait reaches as far as to sway the Straw Hat's enemies, such as Katakuri, and in some cases even convert them, which Oda culminates with the Grand Fleet. Or in the most prominent example would be Robin, right, joining the actual crew. So in summary, Oda places a huge focus on humanity and how it makes people powerful, and sometimes weak, meaning that being human is an important message and plays a role in the lore. From this we can deduce that Joy Boy and Imu were both human, with human motivations for their plans and actions. This is despite Imu's supposed divine status and other mentions of gods in One Piece. Now, just because Sabo has this quote about fate and Luffy sort of doesn't care about fate at all, fate certainly does play an important role, stated explicitly by Rayleigh when he said, "Maybe nothing in this world happens by accident. As everything happens for a reason, our destiny slowly takes form." Luffy accidentally ate his devil fruit. Boa and her sisters were forced to eat devil fruits. Buggy accidentally ate his devil fruit. Momo ate a devil fruit because he was hungry. In fact, almost all devil fruit users accidentally eat their fruit, or at least ate one not by their own choice. So here we see how Oda uses fate to interact with characters' destinies. We can also be sure that fate is important because events that serendipitously repeat themselves, such as the God Valley incident, happens again with the Egghead Island incident. Because these events repeat themselves, we can uncover clues, such as the fact Xebec was likely Garp's mentor, and sacrificed himself for Garp, reflected in the present day by the Rocky Port incident where Garp does the same for Kobe. Side note, I've literally just read 1145, and in that Xebec calls Loki a brat, which is evidence we've been using for a long time, which is a word distinctly used by Garp. In One Piece, this is best embodied by the concept of inherited will, a force that seemingly binds Joy Boy's successors to his destiny in some way or another. However, Oda explains that fate can play an important role in helping the heroes of the One Piece world. For example, the Straw Hats discover the real golden city of Shandora, despite it being thought to be a mythical city, demonstrating how their determination has made the impossible become possible. Ivankov called these effects miracles, saying miracles can only descend upon those with the will to carry on. So here we see Luffy and his Nakama are helped by miracles because of their ambitious nature. This is embodied completely by a quote from Iceberg in chapter 430, which states, "Right now I'm looking at a miracle. The miracle of a ship that has gone far beyond its limits, right before the merry burns." We saw something similar when young Kuma gets hit with a beam of light in the church, suggesting his unwavering faith has been gifted with a miracle after a horrific ordeal at the God Valley hunting games. Earlier I mentioned Luffy fighting Lucci, during which Oda touches on the same motif through Luffy, who says, "What do you know about impossible?" Additionally, I mentioned Frankie's post-Enies lobby speech, whereby he also said it can only be called a miracle after the Straw Hats are saved by drowning from the Jugon. Perhaps this particular miracle could foreshadow that Joy Boy met Poseidon from nearly drowning. After all, Luffy can't swim, so it's a fitting connection. In contrast to this, we see the world government fake a holy beam of light with Sister Carmel when she gives her speech in order to infiltrate Elbaf. So Oda is showing here how heroes are gifted by fate through a beam of light in Kuma's case, and the villains are manipulating people using a beam of light in Carmel's case. So you have true fate versus fake fate, you could say. Additionally, one aspect of fate in One Piece is that the Straw Hats all seem to be mysteriously bound by ancient wills. As the story continues, we're probably going to get more direct parallels, for example, between Zoro and Ryuma, potentially even Zoro and Najiro as the reverse. And I do have a video coming out about each of the Straw Hats and the ancient will that they tied to. Okay, so despite Luffy's strong sense of independence, he still requires others, highlighted when Luffy says, "Being alone is more painful than getting hurt." Luffy's treasure is his straw hat. Luffy puts Nami in his straw hat by putting it on her head, telling the reader although they're not blood related, Luffy considers his Nakama as important to him as his treasure. Luffy also says, "I know that I need every member of my crew. I can't use swords or navigate the seas or cook or lie. I need them all," confirming this. Robin adds, "No matter how much you want to do things alone, no one can accomplish anything by themselves," which could potentially also highlight Imu's vulnerability as an isolated monarch. Luffy's relationship with other characters is central to his sense of freedom, as well as his development as a character, and he relies on them saying, "Without you, I cannot become the Pirate King." This aligns with what we're told about bonds between Nakama being a powerful force. Dofi highlights the importance of Nakama in 767 when he says, "In this world, there are countless things you can't possibly do alone," adding to the point. Usopp says in chapter 322, "The things you can't do alone, call for your friends to help." And Zoro adds to this in 485 saying, "I refuse to let my comrades die, even if it means sacrificing my own life." We get the same sentiment shared by Frankie in 423 saying, "I died once, I don't mind throwing my life away again so the Straw Hats can leave here alive." On the other hand, however, Luffy is also needed by his Nakama, illustrated by Chopper, who says, "I realized that back then the reason I wanted to become a human was that I really just wanted to have friends. Now I just want to be a monster that can help Luffy." Here Oda tells us the bonds between friendship are what's important, and not the self. Something Oda reiterates in the Bink Sake line, "Doesn't matter who you are, someday you will be bones." Luffy is the linchpin of the Straw Hat crew, told to us in Zoro's quote, "If you waver, who can we have faith in?" Zoro also explains the mechanics of the Nakama theme in a monologue, stating, "What is teamwork really when you get right down to it? It's just about protecting each other and helping each other out." I guess most people would say so, but they're just fooling themselves. I think teamwork is more than that in the end. It's about individuals taking individual risks, if you ask me. We work together by working separately. You stand up to risk your own life. You do what you can, the best you can, then you turn to others and expect the same from them. Bonds between Nakama are repeatedly mentioned as sources of power and conviction. Idaho even says, "It's required for victory," in the quote, "We're doing this together because victory doesn't come to one person alone." This is contrasted by the world government's way of doing things, which involves isolation and attempts at empowering humans unnaturally, only to be disposed of if they fail. Luffy showed this in Water 7, saying to Nero, "Everything about you is a work in progress." Cypherpol 9 doesn't need you. You are only superhuman if you possess the 6 powers, right before disposing of them. Oda tells us bonds between Nakama are strengthened through emotions. The Nakama theme in One Piece is often embodied by the Sake Cup ritual. Roger had Sake brothers and he was like Joy Boy. Odin drank sake with them too, and he's a parallel of Joy Boy. Luffy and Ace and Sabo also drank sake, so it's pretty much guaranteed that Joy Boy also had Sake brothers. So from this we can infer that Joy Boy and Imu had Nakama, such as Emeth, and potentially even were each other's Nakama at one point. Once we introduce the connections both have to Lily Nefertari, it becomes apparent that with the addition of Lily they were a close trio, and we see this all the time in One Piece. For example, we have the Monster Trio, Roger Garp and Xebec Trio, a captain and his 2 wings make a trio, and the whole astrological concept of a grand trine, which is an alignment of 3 planets that Oda's referenced before. Notably, the Sake Cup ritual is called Sakazuki, sharing the same name with Akainu, hinting that Akainu's inevitable tragic backstory will involve the death of a close Nakama. Imu and Joy Boy's perspective on Nakama is conveyed through the current era featured in the story, such as when King boasts to Zoro about superior genetics, to which Zoro replies, "I hate those kind of excuses." Oda highlights the dichotomy of the 2 different perspectives here, which is that the world government's approach is that allies are disposable resources, valued according to their nature, such as lineage. The other is Luffy's approach, which is to cherish and nurture and support his Nakama, merely because he wants to. Luffy doesn't actually care about his nature, he doesn't care about his parents are, etc, etc. Both of these approaches reflect Imu and Joy Boy's personal backstories and defines their perspective of the world. Oda chooses justice in the story to highlight the difference in these perspectives. Spandam is a great example of justice in One Piece, embodied in the quote in chapter 423 saying, "This is the power of the Buster Call. This is justice, Cutty Flam. Now hand over Nico Robin and I'll overlook your crimes." The quote shows how the world government use the law to persecute, but ignore it or bend it when it's convenient to them, so their morals are corruptible, basically. Often in stories, the protagonist follows the light path, and the antagonist follows the dark path, but we are often reminded in One Piece that the lines here are blurred. Dofi gives us the best definition of true justice in the series, with his absolute fan-favourite speech, featuring the quote, "Whoever wins the war becomes justice." Saul in Robin's flashback says, "There are as many rights and wrongs in this world as there are viewpoints." Kuzan repeats this notion when he says, "Justice changes its shape depending on where you stand." So interestingly, all 3 of these characters are closely tied to the world government, yet have their own opinion of justice. This is echoed by Sword, which is epitomized by Luffy's grandfather, Garp. From this, we can see that despite Imu's totalitarian rule, different perspectives are inevitable and will lead to the clash of ideals. At one point, Smoker says, "You've got some weird illusions about the Marines. As long as man joins together to conspire against man, there is no such thing as a perfect, untainted organization. Assumptions will let the enemies walk free. Don't be deceived by their appearances." What Smoker means when he says "don't be deceived" is elaborated on when Law says, "There are things you can't see unless you change your perspective." In other words, Joy Boy likely gained a grander perspective as someone who travelled the world, whereas Imu's perspective on justice is sheltered and limited to what Imu has experienced. This also is soft confirmation that Imu cannot leave Marijois, which is how Oda physically manifests Imu's isolated point of view. Oda hints at the nature of the perspective when Neptune, the only character named after a planet that isn't a Gorosei member, tells us outdated laws are just curses. This means the law of the world government no longer serves the people, has become outdated, and now acts as a hindrance to people's way of life, which we see through holy tributes, etc. But how is it people get these different perspectives and ideas of justice in the One Piece world? More specifically, why is it that Joy Boy and Imu have different definitions of justice? Paying close attention to the story tells us the difference in their takes on justice is because of their childhoods and the effects of isolation. This is reflected in the same Dofi speech from earlier in the line, "Kids who have never seen peace and kids who have never seen war have different values." The most prominent example of this is Kuma's character, later succeeded by Bonnie. Bartholomew Kuma's backstory in One Piece is a tragic yet powerful example of how childhood experiences shape ideals and perspective, reinforcing a recurring theme in the series, the way upbringing and early suffering mold a person's worldview. As a child, he was enslaved by the Celestial Dragons, an experience that deeply affected him both physically and mentally. Kuma's flashback featured the hunting games of the god Valiant. After eating the pawpaw fruit, Kuma and Nakama settled in the Sorbet Kingdom. Again, his experience was marked by suffering under the rule of the oppressive King Bakuri and the influence of the world government. Despite this, Kuma was naturally kind-hearted, and he maintained a faith in the value of protecting others, an ideal that would later define his entire life. His suffering as a child instilled in him a hatred for oppression, as he experienced firsthand the cruelty of the Celestial Dragons and sought to resist them. It also solidified his belief in self-sacrifice, as he consistently placed others before himself, from enduring pain to protect other people, and later becoming a Pacifista Project test subject to ensure Bonnie's safety. Kuma's backstory reflects a larger trend in One Piece, where characters' childhood experiences forge their moral compasses and long-term ambitions. Luffy and Sabo, for instance, were raised under different conditions, Luffy by a loving grandfather and Dadan, Sabo by abusive nobles, leading them both to develop different takes on freedom, which might even play into the Sabo quote I said earlier, where Sabo believes that humans preside over fate, which is a very Celestial Dragon kind of vibe. Doflamingo, having witnessed the downfall of his once powerful family, became ruthless and power-hungry. Nico Robin, persecuted by the world government as a child, developed a deep distrust of authority, but also a thirst for uncovering the truth. Kuma's case fits into this pattern, but in contrast to many others, his childhood suffering did not make him cruel or vengeful. Instead, it cemented his selfless ideals. This contrast between pain and kindness reinforces Oda's message. People may react differently to suffering, but the most admirable characters in One Piece endure the past. This contrast between pain and kindness reinforces Oda's message. People may react differently to suffering, but the most admirable characters in One Piece endure their past without losing their humanity. Kuma's decision to become a cyborg and work with the Revolutionary Army, while still agreeing to serve the world government, stems from his understanding that true freedom often comes with personal sacrifice. His willingness to endure suffering for the sake of others mirrors his past experiences, showing how childhood not only shapes ideals but also determines the way one chooses to act on them. This makes Kuma one of the most tragic yet noble figures in the entire story. Someone whose entire life has been dictated by an unshakable belief in protecting others, even if it means erasing himself in the process. Vegapunk underscores this all when he says to Bonnie, "It doesn't matter if the entire planet is against you, Kuma will always be on your side." The last aspects of Kuma that makes childhood such an integral part of his character is his young daughter, who has the ability to turn people into children. As a child, she has become a notorious pirate, initially motivated by the shitty part of the world, that Imu inspired, only later to reignite her motivation through the Joy Boy figure Luffy and become an agent against the world government. So through Kuma's sacrifices, his daughter has become a hero of the One Piece world. Also through children, Oda demonstrates how perspectives are shaped in One Piece. This can include their upbringings, origins, and lineage, such as the purge for Roger's son, which delayed Ace's birth and ultimately caused his mother's death. Ace grew up to sacrifice his life to save Luffy, perpetuating Joy Boy's will like his father. Alternatively, according to Kid, when scum rule the world, more scum is born, suggesting Imu perpetuates her own trauma through those born in the modern era under her reign. Shame on all of you, your fear of the alien exposes your own ignorance. It is absolutely pathetic for you to torment little children, is said by Odin in chapter 963, reinforcing this. It's hinted at that particular world government institutions may play a deeper role in manipulating children, such as Cypherpol, who not only recruit children, but seem to be recruited themselves within the family, as demonstrated by characters such as Kumadori's mum being a Cypherpol assassin, as well as Who's Who, Spandam, and others having their relatives appear within the subdivision at the Ohara incident. Big Mum is another example of Oda making a point about children, with her main parental figure known as Mother Carmel, a despicable woman known for selling children to the world government. We see ties to Carmel in Big Mum's name, with Mum referencing the mother in Mother Carmel, symbolic of the influence Carmel still has over Linlin. Carmel's lasting influence gets deeper when we note some of Big Mum's memories are in fact Carmel's, something that I touched on in a recent video and could foreshadow the fact that Xebec's memories affect Blackbeard. We also see Big Mum has over 100 children, unlike Carmel, who adopted loads of orphans. This reflects Mother Carmel as a parallel to the world government, highlighted by the fact it's Cypherpol that Carmel sells her orphans to. The children at Lamb's house can each be linked to characters inside the world government throughout the story, which for the sake of brevity I'll just show on the screen. So we can see that Oda is portraying how the world government perceives and subsequently treats children. He's telling us a child's upbringing in the One Piece world defines their dreams, such as Blackbeard's dream of destruction. In chapter 603, Rayleigh tells us that a child is someone who can't make choices for themselves in the quote, "A person grows up when he has to, when he ceases to whine and starts doing things on his own." This is another way of saying vulnerable, depicted in Elbaf, for example, by the children sleepwalking and that they need to be saved by their teachers, etc, etc. Earlier we spoke about free will. Here the idea is best illustrated by Nico Robin. Robin's defined by tragedy. Her people and home were wiped out, and now she wishes to continue the will of Ohara and its history of discovering and recording knowledge. Robin's peaceful life was shattered when the world government deemed the research on Ohara a threat, fearing it could uncover secrets they wished remained hidden, in what became known as the Ohara incident. Robin witnessed the island's destruction at only 8 years old, losing her mother and everything she loved. Now branded a fugitive and one of the last survivors of Ohara, her journey became a solitary and dangerous one, marked by constant evasion and survival. To make matters even more tragic, her skills as an archaeologist made Robin an invaluable asset to powerful individuals who sought to read the poneglyph. This is an intense amount of trauma for one person to take, and inevitably leads to a transformation. Whether this transformation is into a hero or villain is down to the person. For example, it's possible that this trauma resulted in Robin's transformation during her fight with Black Maria, where she turned into an actual demon. No explanation was given, but she grew horns, wings, and lots of spider-like arms, and then proceeded to break Maria in two. As a quick aside, I've got a previous video where I discussed the fact that Black Maria was half Ushi Oni and has loads of ties to Saturn, who wasn't Ushi Oni, so there might be a deeper connection between the three of them. The wild and destructive emotional change contrasts Robin's usually stoic demeanour, suggesting Robin was reflecting the Gorosei's yokai transformations and unleashed a deeper power. This transformation resembles Robin used this ability to free her friend, which is in contrast to the Gorosei, who instead use their yokai forms to suppress freedom and truth. On a symbolic level, we often see references to sheep or lambs, which are metaphors for innocence and youth. In the cover page of 742, Robin reads a book called Stray Sheep to alpacas, leading them to fall asleep and dream bubbles that float up. We see something similar in a cover page with Luffy dreaming and counting sheep. The stories of Stray Sheep are the stories of the big players in the world. such as Roger, Nolan and Louis Arnault. And these characters usually start off with quite a turbulent childhood. Their stories inspire the dreams of those paying attention, which in turn rise up to become the status quo and modern era. Odin says, "They can forget me for all I care. My soul will live on. Build your strength while you can, for I am a story to accompany your drinks," in chapter 972, pretty much confirming that. "An island from a dream within a dream, you can't get there unless you dream," is a quote from Rayleigh in chapter 507 that shows how dreams create the reality people live in. A solid example would be Roger inspiring the hunt for the One Piece with his own last words. Additionally, the oldest reference in the story we have to something like this in the Alabaster Crypts with the hero of Mamudine who lived during the Age of Heavens, suggesting there was a change of era at that time, matching what we know about the One Piece calendar. But moving on, it's likely Imu and Joy Boy had different upbringing. For example, traumatic experiments sponsored by the world government feature throughout the story, from which we can speculate that Imu was experimented on in some traumatic way. A lesson learned with blood is never forgotten, is said by Dragon in chapter 1000, strengthens the idea Imu's upbringing was traumatic. This takes us back to the Lucci quote I mentioned earlier, where he says, "You can't be superhuman without the 6 powers," to Nero, a reference to Nerona. You can go deeper here and line that up with the fact that Big Mom lasted 6 days of her fast before freaking out, and Kaido made 6 transformations of the Buddha, with the 7th being thwarted by Luffy. We can see in One Piece themes repeat themselves. This tells us the theme is central to the story, which means it likely reflects elements of the Void Century, such as Joy Boy and Imu's conflict of ideals. By observing these recurring themes, we can piece together what happened to the Ancient Kingdom specifically. For example, in most arcs we see a battle for power and control of whatever island features in the arc. Alabasta had a civil conflict, Drum Island had a civil conflict, Sorbet Kingdom had a civil conflict, and in Elbaf, yet again we see another civil conflict, this time between father and son in the form of Loki and Harold. From this we can infer that Joy Boy and Imu were involved in a civil conflict. This suggests Joy Boy and Imu were from the same kingdom, because that's how civil conflicts work. Seeing as we know Joy Boy's from the Ancient Kingdom, this tells us Imu is too. This would mean that Imu had access or knowledge of advanced technology, fitting elements we see throughout the story in traumatic experiments that seem to be an attempt at recreating aspects of a bygone era, such as giants and devil fruits. The current era mirrors how Imu was brought up and the consequence of that rivalry and upbringing. Imu now perpetuates this system, and as the ruler of the world, this means children currently suffer in the same way, foreshadowed by Kid at the auction house in Sabaody, saying, "What a facade, it's just a smaller version of the world." Joy Boy's legacy can also be seen, however, less commonly, considering his legacy was purged. A subtle nod to this is the smile of the children in Ohara, which matches Luffy's. Oda told us in supplemental material the village these children come from and Luffy's village, Fuchsia, are the only 2 in the story based off these specific English villages, suggesting a deeper thematic connection between the 2. Joy Boy was born in the Ancient Kingdom 900 years ago and lived until around the end of the Void Century. Vegapunk confirmed this in his speech when he said, "The main character of the story was born into a kingdom with an impossibly advanced civilization 900 years ago. This means the birthright in question would be to the throne of the Ancient Kingdom." Since Joy Boy's era, the Ancient Kingdom fractured and spread across the globe, with its remnants falling under the rule of the world government. These remnants make up the islands we see in the story, confirmed by Vegapunk, who stated, "We are currently living on the pieces of a continent that existed long ago." This likely reflects a division not only in the physical kingdom, but a divide in the political kingdom, evoking what we saw with the Sorbet Kingdom under King Bakori. Now, considering the D-Clan is comprised of people from all different lands, it could be that they're the descendants of the Ancient Kingdom, and a product of this divide. A division in culture plays a key part in One Piece, hinted at when Sanji says, "Think of what can live together. It's as simple as that," after Luffy catches a shark which eats the rest of the fish in his tank. This makes sense, as no celestial dragons are members of the D-Clan, and are instead likely descendants of those who overthrew the D-Clan and the Ancient Kingdom. Oda foreshadows this through the 3 Saki brothers, 2 of which are D members, and Sabo being the only one related to celestial families not having the initial. This is also manifested in the modern narrative, with members of the D-Clan often resisting or struggling with authority, such as Saul saving the books of Ohara despite being a Marine. Evidence that the D-Clan and Ancient Kingdom are tied can be seen the only two members of the D-Clan that died without smiling. Clover was killed for saying the name of the Ancient Kingdom, and Cobra was killed for saying the D initial, suggesting these two things could potentially share the same name. Clover says, how can someone die for just having the wrong name, which fits in nicely here. This starts to add up when you realise the only part of Vegapunk's speech was when he was naming the clan and talking about who they were. That was conveniently interrupted, so the reader doesn't know what was said when Vegapunk spoke about the D-Clan. So Imu's actions likely divided the Ancient Kingdom into two, causing it to become vulnerable to defeat. But how could Imu's followers ever be able to finally overthrow the Ancient Kingdom when the 20 kingdoms under Imu don't have the superior technology? We know this because some of the kingdoms that still participate in the reverie don't even have electricity. In chapter 142 we see Cobra's flashback of an old reverie and still basic technology, so nothing's changed. Additionally, we know that the people that do have the skills or knowledge to advance civilization and technology are usually pursued by the world government. For example, Clover, Tom, Vegapunk, all of whom are currently dead. So how did Imu overwhelm such an advanced civilization? During Marineford, Doflamingo says, pirates evil, marines are righteous. These terms have always changed throughout the course of history. Oda is showing us that the faction in power has switched places many times throughout history, and that the people who are at the top are the ones who decide what the definition of justice is. This implies that during the Void Century, the definition of justice was shifted by Imu against the Ancient Kingdom. In the Dressrosa arc, Oda gives us an important parallel. The Don Quixote family tricked the population of Dressrosa to think that they were the heroes and the Riku family were the villains, despite it in fact being the other way around. The Riku family had been framed for a massacre actually committed by the Don Quixote family. The Don Quixote family pretended to be the saviors when they are in truth the oppressors of Dressrosa, which is the same story that is being told to us regarding the Ancient Kingdom. In other words, during the Void Century, Imu and her followers manipulated the truth which brought down the Ancient Kingdom. So, how did Imu twist the status quo against the Ancient Kingdom? Well, Oda already showed us with Lalesia. Imu was revealed to have a powerful and destructive weapon, which Vegapunk confirmed to be Uranus. So it appears that 800 years ago, Imu used the same weapon on Eni's lobby, powered by an ancient fuel mirroring the Mother Flame. By doing this, Imu frames the Ancient Kingdom, their ancient weapons, and the energy source that powers them. So if Imu did blast Eni's lobby, unaliving thousands while framing the Ancient Kingdom, then even if the Ancient Kingdom attacked the world government, it would only solidify the hate against the Ancient Kingdom further, leading to a greater war. Furthermore, this would make a powerful guise for the 20 kingdoms that still meet up at the Reverie to this day to demonize the Ancient Kingdom, giving them justification to cut them out of history. Imu didn't do this alone though, but instead had help from the other 20 kingdoms, as I mentioned. The Gorosei could be members of the 20 kingdoms, and Oda gives subtle clues to each of their motivations, which fits with the idea of a conflict of ideal. As in the case in most arcs in One Piece, the Gorosei likely were involved in political conflicts, echoes of which we can see in the current timeline. It's looking like it was one member from each region of the world, with the only exception being Fishman Island, which instead has Neptune, who is also named after a planet. Using Ethan Baron Nuzdro as a case study, I'll briefly summarize the other Gorosei members a little more compressed, so that we're not here forever. Nuzdro is heavily tied to Wano. Wano was once called the Country of Gold, linking Nuzdro as head of finance. His name contains V, referencing Venus, a symbol of gold, luxury and wealth. Orochi's financial dealings mirror Nuzdro's themes, and Orochi's fiery death parallels Nuzdro's yokai form, the Bakatsu, a burning horse. Nuzdro wears a kimono instead of a suit like the other Gorosei, further tying him to Wano. His white kimono evokes Wado Ichimonji, a Wano-made sword. As the only swordsman of the Gorosei, he recognized Zoro's Sandai Kitetsu instantly. Zoro adopting Juro in Wano connects to Nuzdro's name, as does Kanjuro's name with the suffix Juro. Denjiro's transformation into Kiyoshiro mirrors Nuzdro's possible past identity. Kiyoshiro led a Yakuza, not a blood family, hinting at Nuzdro's formation of the Korozumi clan. Dendro's eyes change dramatically similar to what we see in Imu. The name similarities continue. Dendro's suffix Jiro means second son, while Nuzdro's Juro means 10th son. Kyushiro, a Wano native and descendant of Ryuma and Kozaburo, shares a visual resemblance to Nuzdro. Kozaburo forged Wado Ichimonji and gave lore on cursed blades, possibly connecting Nozdro to the creation and cursing of black blades. Kyushiro's daughter, Kuina, mysteriously died, and Nozdro uses a one-sword style just like her. Ryuma's name contains Uma, horse, paralleling Nozdro's horse yokai form. Could Nozdro and Ryuma have had a mentor and student relationship like Kyushiro and Zoro? Nozdro's ice attacks in Egghead linked to the Shimatsuki, whose name means frost moon. Ringo, the likely Shimatsuki homeland, hosts the Eternal Grave, where bodies don't decay normally, reflecting themes of death and unnatural preservation that we see in Nozdro. Ryuma's well-preserved corpse supports this. The Gorosei's apparent immortality contrasts Oda's stated human lifespan limit of 140 years, which was confirmed with a flashback of Saturn, so this shows it's unnatural. Ringo's bridge over a river symbolizes the river Styx, the bridge between life and death, tying to Brook the ferryman, who Oda said would also be a horse. Ringo might be a play on Limbo, reinforcing and kind of playing with these themes of unnatural preservation and immortality. The Amatsuki clan also lacks a confirmed homeland, but has deep ties to the Shimatsuki and Kurazumi. Amatsuki Toki from 800 years ago was displaced and sought to return to Wano, hinting at a past event involving Joy Boy, the Shimatsuki, the Amatsuki, and the Kurazumi. Joy Boy likely reclaimed Wano for its rightful rulers, probably off of Nozdro. I believe civil strife plagued Wano back then, and we see it again with Orochi's grandfather poisoning rival daimyos, including the Amatsuki. The Kurazumi's treachery seen in Kanjuro and Higurashi led to Wano's decline. These patterns echo an ancient struggle that may reveal Nozdro's true role in Wano's history. Okay, so now with that deep dive covered, let me just summarize what was going on there. You can see more details in the full 40-50 minute video or whatever it is about Nozdro, but the idea is pretty simple. We're given throughout the story these clues through other characters, storylines, and parallels that give a bit of context to the individual Gorosei members. And so it's likely that these Gorosei members had similar struggles we've seen in the stories already. So conflict, particularly civil conflict. And as such, what we'll do now is we'll move on to speedrunning the other Gorosei members, so we can speculate a few details where they might be from and what their agendas were. Through Oda's characterization of Marcus Mars, the reader can infer he is connected to Skypiea, right? In the Egghead arc, Mars' major interactions take place on Punk Records, reminiscent of a Sky Island. Mars looks like York carrying the burn bazooka, right, which is from Skypiea. Mars looks like Ganful, and the yokai form Mars takes is an Itsumadi, the design for which Oda matched to the art style of the murals that depict the Sky Race's descent. Consistent with almost every arc in One Piece, there was likely some sort of family conflict, leaving one side of the family to descend down to Ganful, and the other side of the line going to Marijua to join under Imu, which is embodied by the Shandora versus Burka conflicts up in the Sky Islands. Such connections could lead us to speculate that Nami is involved with overcoming Mars, as she has deep connections to the Sky Islands. My personal prediction, if I had to guess a Gorosei that was going to be in Elbaf, it would be Marcus Mars. Elbaf has tons of connections to Birkins and Sky Islands, and just the imagery fits with Itsumadi as well. So we might see Mars come at the very end of Elbaf and get destroyed, basically. And there could be a little tie-up with Lilith, Mars, and York, because Mars was involved with, turning York against the rest of the Vegapunk. But moving on, Top Man has a very distinct pattern on his Hoki form, which matches what we see with Law's character design, as well as a couple others. Topman Walkery has the word war in his name, and the Vinsmokes, who hail from the North Sea, are highlighted to be the major military faction in the One Piece world, strongly suggesting Topman was engaged somewhat or lost a war to the Vinsmokes in the North. The top in his name could be a nod to North being the top of the map, and Boars and the Hoki Yokai have some interesting connections to snow in One Piece, evoking the White City, Flevens. So Topman's motivations probably stem from a defeat in the Battle of the Vinsmokes, Topman to become bitter, etc, etc. I know I just glazed over that very lightly, but if Topman isn't from the North Blue, or isn't his region, then I will give you my channel. Because there is plenty more evidence, and all of these line up so well. Saturn featured heavily during the Egghead arc, for example. This arc features the South Blue prominently, as well as a character such as Bonnie, Ginny, and Kuma. Saturn connects to these characters on a personal level, seen through flashbacks throughout the arc, which involved Saturn at God Valley. Saturn's involvement with Ginny and resulted in Saturn's connection to Bonnie in the current storyline. Furthermore, the unique pattern that Saturn shows is flame markings, echoing what we learnt about the eternal flame and flame energy. Saturn ridiculed scientists, Beside Nozdro, Saturn is one of the more obvious Gorosei to place, as his connections just tie so heavily to the South Blue. So we've got Nozdro over at Wano in the New World, we've got Topman in the North Blue, we've got Saturn in the South Blue. Now, the hardest one to place is probably Jupiter. I'm covering Jupiter in his own video pretty soon, but Jupiter could be connected to Alabasta, and may even be Lily Nefertari's younger brother. This Gorosei member was shown to not have as much knowledge as the other members, like in the whole scene when they were talking about the Nika fruit. The Nefertari are connected to serpents, and Jupiter's yokai is a sandworm. Suggests the sandworm may have been the one to create the tunnels that were then used for the hot springs years later. A large overlooked aspect of the Gorosei is their connection to disease. Each member appears linked to a specific region, and in these regions, a significant illness or affliction arises. Topman Walkery, seemingly tied to the North Blue, connects to Amber Lead Syndrome, a hereditary and terminal disease caused by exposure to precious yet toxic mineral amber lead. Marcus Mars, associated with Skypiea, corresponds with tree fever, a deadly affliction seen highlighted in that region. Nozdro is from Wano, where we see the pollution from manufacturing smile fruits causes the locals to suffer permanent smiles. Saturn, of course, ties to Sapphire Scale through his connections to the South Blue and Ginny, and if Jupiter is from Alabasta, then it's likely, in my opinion, the 5-day disease that fits this pattern. Oda seems to be suggesting that humanity's pursuit of godlike powers always comes at a cost, and that power in all its forms has consequences. The connection between gods and valuable resources is a central theme in One Piece, and it's only building. A prime example is God Valley, a location whose name alone implies a divine significance tied to an undisclosed yet highly valuable resource. We know this because that was the reason they were staked to choose God Valley. Whatever lies hidden at God Valley was so powerful that it drew the attention of the world's strongest figures. Similarly, in the North Blue, the island of Flevence was rich in amber lead, a sought-after mineral that proved to be a death sentence for its inhabitants, cursing them with a fatal disease passed down through generations. But how does this connect to gods? Trafalgar Law, a survivor of Flevence, wields the Opi Nomi, a fruit that just so happens to have the legendary ability to grant immortality. The contrast here is significant. Amber lead, which shortens lifespan, is juxtaposed with the Opi Nomi's ability to extend them. Even the name Amber Lead hints to this. Amber is often associated with preservation, such as the famous scene in Jurassic Park with the fossilized mosquitoes, while lead is the opposite of gold in traditional alchemy, implying toxicity and corruption. This dichotomy may reflect Imu, the shadowy ruler of the world who is often depicted in darkness. If Imu is tied to the mining of amber lead, then their own longevity may come at the direct cost of human lives, a cycle of power sustained through suffering. Not good. Now, the reason why I bring this up as relevant to the core meaning of the story is because gods have been used to reflect energy sources in One Piece. We can think of it kind of like Sun God Nika, solar power, Rain God is hydroelectric vibes, so think Alabasta and the drought. Then we have the Earth God, which is fossil fuels, so relevant to the amber lead thing, you know, they're mining amber lead and a product of it is people are getting sick. And of course the Forest God, which is probably like biomass energy, right, living energy, which we actually see in Wano pretty detailed when Greenball's walking around and we see the side effects of his devil fruit. Oda weaves this symbolism throughout the series, but the most direct example is Enel. As the self-proclaimed god of Skypiea, he wields the Goro Goro, generating electricity. His cover story revealed that his power served as an energy source for the ancient moon city of Burka, essentially powering up the entire city, and the city shares its name with his birthplace in Skypiea. This direct link between divinity and energy reinforces the idea that gods in One Piece play a massive role in the exploitation of resources and power throughout, and we will see this reflected in the 3 eras of history that's been foreshadowed in Elbaf. Now, a more abstract example would be Luffy, whose presence fuels revolution and liberation. His charisma and determination acts as a catalyst, igniting rebellion and inspiring those around him to essentially stop taking shit. In this sense, Luffy embodies the power of fire, a force that can either destroy or illuminate, depending on its use. He does not seek to exploit energy like the Gorosei, and instead he sparks change. So the most important contrast here is, while Imu is probably using the world's resources at a very costly rate to sustain her own agenda and immortality, Luffy doesn't intend any of that, and he just, as a byproduct of being the sun, fuels people to nurture their own dreams and grow and develop. And we are told that it's inevitable, and this is how the world changes. There is one key moment during the Void Century that is more important than any other, and it ties pretty much all of the elements we've spoken about today together. This is when Imu became immortal. Through Doflamingo's monologues, we as readers can discern that 2 surgeries took place during the Void Century, which is the body swap surgery and the immortality surgery. I go into detail explaining this in a previous video if you want more details about the specific words that were used that tell us exactly what happened. What makes this moment so important is that Imu cannot develop out of her old ways, because without death there is no rebirth, and so no changing of an era. Imu is quite literally stuck in her ways. This foreshadows Imu's death as a certainty if we believe that Luffy will succeed. The fact Imu is one of the most important characters of the entire series tells the reader death and rebirth are key to Oda's message, like absolutely tons of other myths. Mortality and immortality are key themes in the story and will likely come up again around Luffy's lifespan, repeatedly being depleted, and many believe Imu to have extended life. Characters like Kureha highlight mysterious secrets around youth, while Giola talks about immortality in heaven with her art fruit, connecting immortality back to godhood again. Conversely, Oda includes elements that reduce lifespan, such as the Amber Lead syndrome or the hormones that Ivankov used to treat Luffy. Now, what's interesting here is Dofi tells us that power has a short shelf life, and yet Imu preserves a giant straw hat in the Marie Joie cellar. In contrast, Roger was too early for Laugh-Tale, meaning Joy Boy's legacy takes time and require people to shepherd the will of D along. In other words, this tells there's an element of decay involved with Imu's character, which we see associated with lifespan again in stuff like Amber Lead. In other words, Imu's power and or life is depleting over time, or perhaps each generation. So what we're saying here is that the straw hat being artificially preserved suggests that there's something in there that's decaying over time. Now, when we align that with what Dofi said about power having a short shelf life, and then you contrast that against the fact that the will of D has taken over 800 years to complete, it would suggest that basically Imu's on a more like an impatient response, quick reward systems vibe, whereas Joy Boy has learned that these things that true change takes a long time, and it's about making sacrifices that contribute to guiding them changes over the centuries. Now, we could go down the rabbit hole and look at the interactions between the lore surrounding Lily Nefertari and Imu, which might suggest there could be reasons Imu kidnapped Vivi, and if Imu is successful, they might use Vivi to reset Imu's shelf life per se. So in other words, a mortal surgery or something like that is performed on a Nefertari woman, just like it was on Lily, or something along them lines, and then is instilled inside Imu to essentially revitalize Imu for another generation. Now, it's from here that we can understand that the message Oda is telling the reader is that, while the external things don't last forever, it's what's inside that counts, and what's inside that's immortal. So Imu's rule is external, it can't go on forever, but Imu's legacy that she's left will go on forever, unless it's forgotten. Joy Boy understood this, so passed down a message that resonates internally through will, bonds, and friendships. The voice of all things is something that affects a person internally also, whereas Imu, on the other hand, changes people physically, changes the world physically, and rather than changing herself to her surroundings, she changes her surroundings to herself, which throughout history has been referred to as masculine energy or Western energy. Because Vegapunk told us that Roger learned the truth from the purest source, which was something at Laugh-Tale. In other words, you have to have a connection to the voice of all things, most likely, to actually understand the true history for what it really is and understand what the One Piece is, which Imu probably doesn't have access to because she's so externalized, right? Oda intrinsically wove the idea of prolonged life with advanced technology through the fire thief motif, something we see repeatedly throughout the story. In fact, I would argue it's probably one of the most prominent themes throughout all of One Piece. The fire thief motif is the notion that as humans develop certain aspects of themselves, most commonly technology, they risk destroying themselves. In other words, while fire brings development such as cooking food, it also brings risks such as burning yourself. Nuclear energy is commonly attached to this idea in the modern world because while it provides clean and stable energy for the most part, it also facilitates the capacity for nuclear weapons. All of this was embodied by Oda and the Mother Flame in that whole situation. Oda, the Mother Flame, and aspects of greed within humanity during Egghead. In terms of the story, this refers to the Ancient Kingdom and the fact that they developed advanced technology beyond what they could control. Presumably, devil fruits are among these inventions. In line with the fire thief motif, it's likely desire from necessity turned to greed, and the Ancient Kingdom pushed their capabilities too far at the expense of its people, and ultimately the kingdom itself. The biggest victim to all of this, I believe, is Imu, and this creates the foundation for why Imu is such a tit. All of this history led to the ancient kingdom fracturing and spreading across the world, with its remnants falling under the rule of the world government. These remnants make up islands we see in the story, confirmed by Vegapunk, who stated, "We are currently living on pieces of a continent that existed long ago." Considering the D-Clan is comprised of people from different lands, it could be that they are the descendants of the ancient kingdom. This makes sense as no celestial dragons are members of the D-Clan, and so are likely instead the descendants of those who overthrew the D-Clan in the ancient kingdom. Oda foreshadows this through the three Saki brothers, two of which are Ace and Luffy are D members, and Sabo being the only one related to celestial families and not having the initial. This is also manifested in the modern narrative, with members of the D-Clan resisting or struggling with authority, such as Saul allowing the giants to save the books of O'Hara despite being a marine, right? That would have been against his orders. Evidence that the D-Clan and the ancient kingdom are tied can be seen through some of the only members of the D-Clan that died without smiling. Clover was killed for saying the name of the ancient kingdom, and Cobra was killed for saying the D initial, suggesting these two could potentially share the same name. This starts to add up when you realise the only part of Vegapunk's speech that was actually blurred out was when he was naming the D-Clan and talking about who they really were. Again, this reinforces the idea of contrasting perceptions from Joy Boy and Imu as they share the same name, hinted by Luffy when he says, "If you hurt somebody or if somebody hurts you, the same red blood will be shed," in chapter 218. So what happens? How did three relatives and Nakama, Lily, Joy Boy and Imu come to such a great conflict? One possibility is that Joy Boy was a renowned prince of the ancient kingdom, cherished for all the wrong reasons, such as heritage and prophecy. Now, Imu was probably the younger brother, right? The second son, as it's commonly known, which is foreshadowed by the Juro suffix in Nuzjuro. So there's probably a bit of sibling rivalry between Imu and Joy Boy, and a bit of bitterness, a bit of jealousy, a bit of hate. I think it's likely, while Joy Boy was lauded, what was actually going on behind the scenes was that Imu was being experimented on using advanced technology, and this was done in the name of some sort of search for God or tribute to God or something to do with a higher power. So Imu's the victim being experimented on so that the ancient kingdom discover new technology and grow their power even further. I think this peaked when Joy Boy was arranged to marry Lily, but on learning the truth about what was happening to Imu, Joy Boy fled, forfeiting the crown and essentially going on the first journey to discover the entire world. But he didn't know he was doing that at that point. He was just fleeing the kingdom, right? Leaving his brother behind, leaving the ancient kingdom to Imu as a second son to take over, even though Imu's become twisted at this point. Now, it's possible that Imu even took Joy Boy's place and married Lily, and used this opportunity to bind some of the kingdoms and marry Lily, basically forming political alliances and causing and gaining allies enough to begin to overthrow the ancient kingdom. Subsequently, Imu probably made many freedoms illegal, causing Joy Boy to be the first pirate told by Vegapunk, as well as leading to Lily's exile to Amazon Lily. Through this advanced technology that I was discussing before, after Lily left, I imagine there was some sort of development of lovesickness. It's like an insurance policy for Imu. Lily can't leave, but Lily just decides to leave anyway, causing Imu to be very sick from lovesickness and causing Lily to be so sick she eventually dies. From here, Joy Boy provides aid to those suffering under Imu's. But back to Joy Boy, while he's travelling the world, he's probably aiding those who are suffering under the new rule of Imu, whereby he meets his Nakama and creates his first pirate crew. Joy Boy takes the ancient kingdom symbol as his Jolly Roger, as I've been talking about for years, and sets about liberating the world. Duality is one of the core themes of One Piece, expressed through Luffy and Blackbeard, for example. Oda sometimes manifests this through the idea of human heroes and villains, or monsters. "You're the moon unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled" is a message from the heavens for Imu to move aside, so the dawn of new era may begin, demonstrating a natural procession between yin and yang. The manga tells us about the difference between the two and how they relate to good, bad, and the human experience in the real world. Oda showed us that Imu was nurtured with cruelty, which led to them becoming a totalitarian and hateful global leader, foreshadowed by Captain Morgan in the quote, "My rank is the highest on this base, which makes me superior to everyone else here. That means everything I do is right." This quote explicitly portrays the absolute rule that Imu has over the world, emphasizing the fact Imu's at the top and justice is dictated by the top. This approach is contrasted by protagonists such as Otohime, through her dream and subsequent speech, whereby she illustrates the effects of hateful nurturing, stating, "If you hurt somebody or somebody hurts you, the same red blood will be shed. It hardly seems like a path because it's a very thin and narrow tube, but it makes its way through the prejudice that makes people fear each other and blood feuds so very easily." Fisher Tiger's last words lament the hateful state of the world. He says, "Soon all that will be left in this world is hate. Isn't it ridiculous? My head knows all this, but a demon has taken over my heart. My body would reject that blood. I've tried, but after all this, I just can't ever love a human." Doflamingo confirms the hateful era descends from the top in the quote, "The higher up you go, the more you see of the hatred-filled world." In chapter 782, Roger realized the truth about the world, sacrificed himself, and succeeded in changing it, confirmed by Dadan in the quote, "Your father died and changed the world. When you become the man he was, then you can decide whether you live or die," is a quote from Dadan that tells us Roger succeeded in his mission. Roger and his crew subtly guide Luffy's journey, for example in Elbaf with Scopper Gaban, who mentions mixing races, highlighting how flexibility is important. While this is a reference to Imu's totalitarian regime, it's also a nod towards Luffy's Nika powers, making him flexible. We see this embodied by Nika's distinctive body shape. Roger became king of the pirates, and the story tells us what that entails, by comparing and contrasting Roger against other kings, such as King Bakori, King Wapol, King Riku, King Cobra, King Harold, and King Neptune. Roger's greatest power, like Luffy, was his ability to make allies and draw people to his cause. This was confirmed when Mihawk says it's not a devil fruit or some cheap trick. One by one, he turns the people around him into his allies, more than anyone else sailing the seas. That man possesses the most terrifying power. Additionally, throughout One Piece, a recurring theme emerges. Power, whether divine or industrial, always has consequences. The Gorosei's ties to disease suggest that their control over the world is not just political, but deeply intertwined with suffering. Whether it's the environmental devastation of Wano, the generational curse of Amber Lead, or the toxic consequences of manufacturing smile fruits, the pursuit of godlike power inevitably results in destruction. If gods in One Piece symbolize energy sources, and the Gorosei represent those who exploit them, then Oda may be offering a critique of historical and modern power structures. Those in control have long-wielded resources at the expense of the people, poisoning lands and lives in their pursuit of dominance. At the heart of it all, Luffy stands as the antithesis to this system, and to Imu, not as a god, but as the flame that inspires freedom and change. Thanks for watching today, guys. Join the cause by subscribing, and if you made it this far, you just won some Wapol metal, so let me know where you want it posted in the comments. The next video is about cracking the cipher for the Holy Knights, so we can properly understand who all these people are and how they've featured previously in the story. How did you think the video went? Any improvements? Different music maybe? Or maybe you want to comment on the style of the video. I see some of you want to share your theory thoughts in the comments, but if they're too big, don't break your back over it. Instead, jump in the Discord, say, hey, get some dialogue going and we'll cook something up. Don't forget, if you want to be paid to feature your own theories on the channel, just ask. Additionally, we have some of the most gorgeous 3D prints you've ever seen, all hand-painted by two brothers who you can talk to whenever you want in the Discord, and we also do TCG card holders and frames which are pretty cheap and now litter my house. Links for all of these below in the description. Quick shoutouts to the TLA Discord, which is going absolutely crazy with these new chapters, so consider setting up camp in our cozy crew for the final stretch of the story. Be nice to people, nicer to animals, and toodle pip.